At 9:14 on a humid Friday night, my phone lit up with a message that threatened to destroy my marriage and my freedom in exactly 19 words. The air out on the wraparound porch was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and incoming rain. I sat in a wicker chair, tracing the rim of my crystal glass, watching the liquid catch the low amber light. The ice shifted with a soft clink against the silence of my bluegrass estate. Miles of thoroughbred pasture stretched out into the dark. It was a rolling empire bought by generations of patience and hard work. Then the screen illuminated the darkness, displaying a single text from my husband, Wyatt. He was supposed to be in Houston, securing a shipping contract for his auto manufacturing logistics firm. Instead, his text read, "They found out about the offshore accounts you set up. I cannot take the fall for this. I am leaving." A lesser woman might have dropped the glass. A different wife might have collapsed into the chair, weeping, calling his number frantically until the line went dead. I did neither. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the heat coat my throat. The initial shock lasted barely 3 seconds before it calcified into a pristine, chilling clarity. I had never set up an offshore account in my life. Wyatt was not just walking away. He was actively weaving a net, preparing to offer me up as the sacrificial lamb for whatever corporate crimes he had committed in the shadows. He wanted a paper trail of panic. He wanted me to act like a guilty, panicked wife. I typed 2 words and hit send. Good luck. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Melissa Told Stories. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you ignored the warning signs right in front of you? Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Amber Dunn. I live in a state famous for fast horses and slow bourbon. And until that Friday night, I thought I had built a secure, quiet life. If you want to know how a wife dismantles a criminal husband, keep listening. I set the glass down. It made a sharp, decisive thud against the metal table. Walking back inside, my boots echoed against the reclaimed oak floorboards. I bypassed the sprawling living room and headed straight for my study. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in a room lined with legal texts and financial records. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale, clinical glow across my hands. My fingers did not shake. They moved rapidly over the keys with the precision of a surgeon finding a nerve. I ignored our standard checking accounts and logged straight into the high-yield wealth management portals. Wyatt thrived on leverage and liquid capital. He loved the appearance of boundless wealth. I methodically began dismantling his safety nets. I authorized wire transfers, moving every available dollar from our shared accounts into an isolated holding trust tied solely to my maiden name. The portal asked for secondary verification. I typed in the security codes he never bothered to memorize. The balances on the screen plummeted to 0, one by one. Next, I navigated to the credit portals. Wyatt carried 3 platinum cards that he used to fund his pristine image. Client dinners at 5-star steakhouses, custom golf clubs, imported watches. I terminated them all. The satisfying account suspended notifications popped up in rapid succession. I imagined him standing at some luxury hotel front desk, handing over a useless piece of plastic. The thought did not bring me joy. It brought me focus. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I kept saved for estate emergencies. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Lexington Security and Lock. This is Amber Dunn. I need a full property rekey. Every exterior door, the gates, and the garage bays. I need a technician out here within the hour." The man on the other end cleared his throat. "It is past 9 at night, ma'am. That is double the emergency rate." "Send them," I replied, ending the call. I left the study and climbed the sweeping staircase to the master suite. The house felt different now. The shadows stretched longer against the walls, and the silence felt heavy with impending consequence. I walked into Wyatt's walk-in closet. The space smelled of expensive cedar and his signature cologne. A scent that used to mean safety now smelled like a crime scene. I ignored his leather weekend bag sitting on the top shelf. Instead, I walked down the hall to the utility closet and pulled out a fresh roll of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags. Returning to his closet, I began stripping the hangers. Custom Italian wool suits, pressed silk ties, and imported cotton shirts went straight into the thick plastic. I felt the fine fabric slip through my fingers, noting the cost of each item as I shoved them down into the dark bags. There was no hesitation. There was no lingering sentiment over the fabric of a shared life. I packed away the man I thought I knew, discarding the costumes he wore to deceive me and everyone else. I knotted the tops of the bags, pulling the yellow drawstrings tight, and dragged them out to the hallway. I stacked them near the stairs like refuse, waiting for morning disposal. Headlights swept across the front windows, cutting through the dark living room. The locksmith had arrived. I walked downstairs and opened the heavy oak door, greeting the technician with a nod. For the next hour, I followed him from door to door, watching as he drilled out the old brass cylinders and installed the new ones. The sharp grinding of metal on metal was the only sound in the house. When he finished, he handed me a heavy ring of pristine silver keys. I paid him in cash and locked the front door behind him. The deadbolt snapped into place with a heavy, metallic finality. I stood in the foyer listening to the rain finally begin to fall outside. It lashed against the tall windows, washing the glass in frantic sheets of water. The estate was secure. The financial bleed was contained. I walked upstairs, brushed my teeth, and slid into bed. The sheets felt cold on his side. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm of the rain pull me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I rested in a silent, locked house, unaware of the federal machinery my husband had just set into motion. I slept peacefully, having no idea that the real nightmare would begin at dawn. The dawn broke a dull gray, washing the bluegrass pastures in a pale, lifeless light. The storm from the previous night had moved on, leaving behind a thick, humid chill. I stood in the kitchen, wrapped in a heavy wool cardigan, watching the coffee drip into the glass carafe. The house was silent. It was the kind of quiet that follows a funeral, a still, breathless anticipation of the grief that has not yet fully settled. I held a ceramic mug in my hands, letting the heat seep into my skin. The scent of roasted beans offered a brief illusion of normalcy in a house that felt entirely foreign. Then the knocking started. It was not a polite tap. It was a frantic, jarring rattle against the heavy oak of the front door. The brass handle clattered, echoing through the empty foyer, bouncing off the high ceilings. I set my mug on the marble island and walked toward the entryway. I checked the security monitor, expecting to see federal badges or angry corporate investors demanding answers about Wyatt and his logistics firm. Instead, the small screen showed Caleb. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. Caleb stood on the porch, shivering in the damp morning air. He was a respected local veterinarian, a man who spent his days calming 1,000-pound thoroughbreds and guiding nervous foals into the world. He was usually a pillar of steady, grounded energy, smelling of sweet feed and worn leather. Today he looked like a hollow shell of himself. His jaw was covered in silver stubble, and his eyes were rimmed in red. He wore a rumpled canvas jacket that looked like it had been slept in, the collar turned up against the cold. "She is gone, Amber," he whispered. His voice cracked, fracturing the quiet morning. I stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. He walked past me, moving with a stiff, awkward gait, like a man carrying a physical burden. I closed the door, securing the locks once more, before following him into the kitchen. He sank onto one of the tall leather bar stools, resting his elbows on the cool marble counter and burying his face in his hands. He took a long, jagged breath that sounded dangerously close to a sob. I poured a second cup of coffee and slid it toward him across the smooth stone surface. I did not offer hollow platitudes. I did not tell him everything would be all right because we both knew that was a lie. False comfort serves no purpose when your foundation has just been ripped away. Instead, I stood quietly across from him, waiting for him to find his words. "Paige packed a bag while I was at the clinic," he said, staring blankly at the dark liquid in his mug. "She took her clothes, her shoes, and left her wedding ring sitting on the bathroom sink, right next to my toothbrush. But that is not the worst part." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of printer paper. His hands shook as he smoothed it flat against the counter, pushing it toward me. The paper was slightly damp from the rain outside, but the black ink was perfectly legible. "I checked our accounts this morning," he continued, his tone dropping into a flat, defeated monotone. "The savings are gone. The checking is empty. She even drained the college funds. Every single dollar we set aside for the kids to go to the university next year is gone. She left us with nothing." My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming beneath my ribs. I looked down at the paper. It was a printed email confirmation from a commercial airline. Paige had booked a one-way ticket to a small regional airport near the southern border. The passenger list showed 2 names, her name and Wyatt's. The betrayal hit me with a fresh, piercing sting, cutting through the emotional armor I had spent the night building. Paige was not just a casual acquaintance from the country club. She was the woman who stood beside me at my wedding, holding my bouquet. She was the friend who sat on my back porch, drinking my expensive wine, complaining about the quiet boredom of her suburban life while watching my horses graze. I had always brushed off her complaints as harmless venting, the natural fatigue of a mother and wife. I never realized she was actively auditioning for my life, coveting the wealth Wyatt flaunted. Wyatt did not just frame me for his corporate crimes. He orchestrated an affair with my closest confidant, using her greed and her proximity to me to help fund his escape. I read the flight details again. The departure time was yesterday afternoon, right around the time I was busy reviewing estate logistics with my groundskeeper, and Caleb was performing surgery on a colic mare. They had planned this perfectly, choosing the exact window when neither of us would be checking our phones or rushing home. "How long do you think they have been planning this?" I asked, keeping my tone level, refusing to let the hurt bleed into my voice. Caleb rubbed his temples, his fingers pressing hard into his skin. "Months, maybe." I noticed she was spending a lot of time on her phone, hiding the screen when I walked into the room. She started buying designer luggage last spring, claiming she found them at a discount boutique in Lexington. I was so busy with the clinic, treating sick animals, that I did not question it. I trusted her. Why would I question my own wife? I nodded, understanding the bitter, metallic taste of that word. Trust was a currency Wyatt and Paige exploited with ruthless efficiency. We sat in the kitchen dissecting the timeline, laying out the past year of our lives like a coroner examining a chart. We mapped out every supposed late night Wyatt spent at the office, every weekend business trip, every sudden excuse Paige had to leave town for a spa retreat. The pieces of their deception snapped together, forming a cohesive, ugly picture of a double life lived right under our noses. But as we talked, a quiet, nagging detail began to bother me. I traced the edge of the printed email, running my finger along the sharp paper edge. Wyatt texted me that they were leaving the country. He explicitly mentioned hiding out where the law could not reach him in his previous boasting. Yet the flight on the paper only went as far as Texas. A domestic flight, a stepping stone. Did she take her passport? I asked. my eyes snapping up to meet his. Caleb paused, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked up from his coffee, clearly thrown by the sudden shift in my questioning. No, that is the thing that makes no sense. When I was searching the house for clues, looking for a note or an explanation, I checked her vanity drawer. Her passport is still there, tucked under her makeup bags. She left it behind. The silence in the kitchen thickened. The air felt suddenly dense, charged with an unseen electric current. I stared at Caleb, processing the immense weight of his words. "You cannot fly to Cancun without a passport," I said softly, outlining the stark reality. "You cannot leave the country at all, legally." Caleb blinked, the realization slowly dawning on his exhausted face. Then why would she leave it? Did she forget in the rush to pack? "Paige does not forget details when money is involved," I replied, shaking my head. "She drained your accounts with surgical precision, leaving not a single cent behind. She would not forget her golden ticket out of the country, if leaving the country was the actual plan." I looked back down at the printed email. The itinerary, the names, the destination. It was all too neat. It was too perfectly arranged to be discovered by a grieving husband sitting on a desk waiting to be found. Wyatt's text to me the night before had been a calculated decoy, designed to make me act like a panicked accomplice. Now, looking at the evidence left for Caleb, I realized the flight confirmation was likely another layer of the exact same trap. Wyatt is a master logistician. I murmured, my mind working rapidly through the variables and the dark possibilities. He spends his life moving auto parts across borders, minimizing financial risk and maximizing operational efficiency. He would never leave a paper trail this obvious, this clumsy, unless he wanted us to find it. Caleb gripped his mug, his knuckles turning white. "You think they are not in Mexico? You think this is a lie?" "I think they are playing a high-stakes shell game," I said. "Wyatt wants everyone looking south. He wants the authorities chasing ghosts across the border, while he disappears in the opposite direction, taking the stolen thoroughbred money with him." The overlapping conflicts tightened around me, forming a suffocating knot in my chest. Wyatt's master plan was far more convoluted than a simple romantic getaway fueled by stolen money. He was manipulating the narrative, planting false evidence to misdirect the investigation while ensuring I took the fall for his corporate embezzlement. Paige was his willing accomplice, blinding herself to the danger for the promise of unearned wealth, abandoning her family without a second thought. I stood up, pacing the length of the marble island, the cold stone chilling my fingertips. I needed to move fast. If Wyatt had orchestrated this level of deception, the authorities were already a step behind him, and they would be looking for the easiest target to blame. That target was the wife left behind with the bank accounts and the estate. "Caleb, I need you to go home," I said, turning to face him, planting my feet firmly on the floor. He looked startled, a flash of panic in his red eyes. "I cannot just sit there, Amber. The house is empty. You need to document everything I instructed." My voice firm, brooking no argument, giving him a task to anchor his spinning mind. "Call your bank and report the theft of the college funds immediately. File a police report for the missing money. Do not mention Wyatt. Do not mention the flight to Texas or Cancun. Only report that your wife emptied the accounts and vanished. You need to establish a separate legal boundary right now to protect yourself and your children." Caleb stood slowly, the exhaustion weighing heavy on his broad frame. "What are you going to do, Amber?" "I am going to prepare," I said, walking him toward the front door, the keys jingling in my pocket. "Because whoever Wyatt is running from, they are going to come here first." I watched Caleb drive his truck down the long, winding driveway, his taillights glowing dull red in the gray morning, disappearing beyond the iron gates. The rain started again, drumming a steady, rhythmic warning against the slate roof. I walked back into the study, pulling out files, corporate ledgers, and tax returns, preparing to build my defense. I knew the quiet isolation of my estate would not last. The law was coming, and I had to be ready to fight an invisible enemy who knew all my weaknesses and use them to set the perfect trap. The storm outside refused to break. Rain lashed against the tall windows of the study, blurring the emerald pastures into an endless wash of gray. I sat behind the mahogany desk, sorting through years of tax returns and corporate filings, trying to build a defense out of paper. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times. Its rhythmic ticking was the only sound competing with the downpour. Then, a new noise cut through the quiet. It was the distinct, heavy crunch of tires rolling over the long gravel driveway. I did not expect Caleb to return so soon. I stood and walked to the window, pulling the heavy curtain back just an inch. A line of 4 dark sport utility vehicles idled near the front steps. Men and women in dark windbreakers stepped out into the rain. The bright yellow letters printed across their backs spelled out a reality I had been anticipating since the sun came up. The federal government had arrived. The pounding on the oak door was sharp and authoritative. I walked down the hall, my boots echoing against the reclaimed wood floor. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. 6 federal agents stood on the porch, rain dripping from the brims of their hats. The man at the front held up a leather badge wallet and a thick stack of folded papers. "Special Agent Donovan," he announced. His voice was flat, carrying the practiced detachment of a man who dismantles lives for a living. "We have a federal warrant to search this premises." I stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. I did not ask what they were looking for because I already knew. The agents flooded into the foyer, moving with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. 2 went straight up the sweeping staircase toward the master suite. Another pair headed for the study. I stood near the entryway, watching strangers pull my home apart. They wore wet boots that squeaked against the polished floor, leaving muddy footprints in their wake. The scent of damp wool and stale coffee filled the air, replacing the comforting smell of aged wood and lavender. Agent Donovan did not join the physical search. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Why do we not sit down, Mrs. Dunn?" I led him into the kitchen, taking a seat on the tall leather bar stool where Caleb had sat just an hour before. Donovan stood on the opposite side of the marble island. He was a tall man, with tired eyes and graying hair. He unzipped his windbreaker and placed a manila folder on the stone counter. "Your husband is a very difficult man to locate," Donovan began. "He skipped a mandatory deposition in Louisville yesterday. His phone is dark. His corporate accounts show highly irregular activity." "Wyatt handles his own schedule," I replied, keeping my tone level. "I assume you are not tossing my home because he missed a single meeting." Donovan offered a tight, humorless smile. "We are here because Wyatt Logistics is at the center of a federal fraud investigation. Over the past 14 months, $4 million has been siphoned from the local thoroughbred investment syndicate." The number hung in the air, chilling the room. The thoroughbred syndicate was the lifeblood of this county. My grandfather had helped establish it. My family had bred champion horses on these very pastures for 3 generations, building a name synonymous with integrity. Wyatt had always resented the old money traditions of the bluegrass elite, but he clearly possessed no qualms about stealing from them. He had used my maiden name, my pristine reputation, to open those exclusive doors and secure those shipping contracts. The betrayal was no longer just a marital offense. It was a calculated desecration of my family legacy. "I am unaware of his corporate dealings," I stated, maintaining my composure. "You are welcome to review his home office." Donovan opened the manila folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the marble island. The crisp white document stopped right in front of my hands. It was a wire transfer authorization routing $1.2 million into an offshore shell company based in the Cayman Islands. I scanned the dense paragraphs of financial jargon. Then my eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. There, sitting on the signature line, was my name. It was not a sloppy imitation. It was a perfect, flawless replica of my handwriting. The sharp angle of the capital A, the subtle trailing loop on the final N. It was a signature I had spent decades perfecting, forged with terrifying precision. The text Wyatt sent me the night before flashed through my mind. They found out about the offshore accounts you set up. I cannot take the fall for this. I am leaving. The trap was a masterpiece of misdirection. Wyatt had forged my signature to move the stolen funds. Then he sent the text, intending for the authorities to find it on my phone. He wanted them to read that message and conclude that I was the mastermind and he was the frightened spouse fleeing my criminal enterprise. He needed me to panic. He needed me to run or hire a frantic defense attorney to fight him, proving my guilt through my desperation. By canceling the cards and locking down the estate, I had merely preserved the crime scene he built for me. "That is a forgery," I said, pushing the paper back across the island. My voice did not tremble. Donovan sighed, pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket and placing it on the counter. "Every white-collar criminal claims forgery, Mrs. Dunn. But the funds moved through a holding trust tied to your maiden name. The authorization originated from an internet protocol address registered to this estate. And early this morning, a federal judge ordered a freeze on all your personal and corporate assets." I looked at him, the reality of his words sinking in like a stone in deep water. "You froze my accounts." "Everything," he confirmed. "Checking savings, investment portfolios. You can buy groceries with whatever cash you have in your wallet, but you cannot transfer a single dime. The thoroughbred investors are demanding blood. They are preparing a civil suit that will seize this entire estate. You are looking at wire fraud conspiracy and embezzlement charges, carrying decades in prison." I watched a young agent walk out of my study, carrying my silver laptop and 2 heavy cardboard boxes filled with Wyatt's files. They were taking my ledgers, my tax returns, the very tools I needed to defend myself. They were physically stripping my life down to the studs, hauling away the evidence that could prove my innocence. "I have done nothing wrong," I said, meeting Donovan's tired gaze. "My husband orchestrated this fraud. He drained the accounts and fled." "Then you need to prove it," Donovan replied, packing the folder back into his briefcase. "You have 72 hours. If you cannot provide hard, undeniable evidence pointing to his sole guilt before the grand jury convenes on Tuesday morning, you will be indicted as a co-conspirator. We will issue a warrant for your arrest. Do not leave the state, Mrs. Dunn." He turned and walked out of the kitchen. I sat on the bar stool listening to the heavy boots march out of my home. The front door clicked shut, sealing me inside once again. Outside, the engines of the sport utility vehicles roared to life, fading down the long gravel driveway until the only sound left was the relentless drumming of the rain. The house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt hollow, violated, echoing with the invisible weight of the bureaucratic machinery trying to crush me. I walked into the study. The shelves were bare. The desk drawers hung open. The neat stacks of paper I had prepared were gone. The feds had taken every piece of digital and physical leverage I possessed. I stood in the center of the stripped room, the silence pressing against my eardrums. The hum of the refrigerator in the distant kitchen sounded deafening. Wyatt had engineered a flawless checkmate. He utilized my reputation to steal millions, forged my signature to create the paper trail, and weaponized the federal government to ensure I took the fall, while he disappeared with the money. He expected me to crumble under the sheer terror of an indictment. He expected the quiet, refined wife to surrender to the overwhelming power of the FBI. I walked back to the foyer, catching my reflection in the antique mirror near the door. My face was pale, but my eyes were sharp, hard, and devoid of fear. My stoic resilience and polite composure were no longer sufficient. Defending myself with quiet truth would not work against a system designed to secure convictions over justice. I needed someone who understood the dark, manipulative language of the legal system. I needed aggressive armor. But before I could hire a predator to fight my legal battles, I had to face the social execution Wyatt had scheduled for me. Tonight was the annual Thoroughbred Charity Gala. The very investors Wyatt had defrauded would be standing in that ballroom holding champagne glasses and whispering my name. If I stayed home and hid, the elite circles of Kentucky would declare me guilty by sundown, sealing my fate before Tuesday ever arrived. I turned away from the mirror and walked upstairs to find a dress suitable for a public battle. I stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, staring at a reflection that felt entirely foreign. The federal agents had stripped my study bare, taking every shred of paper that proved my innocence, but they left my closet intact. For the social warfare I was about to endure, wardrobe was the only arsenal I required. I reached for a long-sleeved, high-necked gown spun from heavy black silk. It was devoid of sequins, lace, or any desperate cry for attention. The fabric offered zero warmth against the chill of the house, but provided an absolute impenetrable shield. It flowed over my shoulders and cascaded to the floor like liquid obsidian. I secured my hair into a tight, polished knot at the nape of my neck and applied a singular coat of deep crimson lipstick. The woman looking back at me was not a victim waiting for a federal indictment. She was a fortress, preparing for a siege. My mother-in-law, Diane, controlled the social stratosphere of the Kentucky bluegrass. She was the matriarch of a sprawling breeding dynasty, a woman who orchestrated million-dollar thoroughbred syndications over afternoon tea and cucumber sandwiches. Diane had always viewed me with polite tolerance. To her, my ancestral land was acceptable, but my quiet, deliberate demeanor was a glaring weakness. When news of the morning raid leaked through the tight-knit community, Diane did not call to offer support or ask if I was safe. Instead, she deployed a vicious, coordinated smear campaign across the country club text chains. The narrative she spun was immediate and brutal. According to Diane, I had driven her brilliant son away out of sheer greed, attempting to steal his assets and framing him for my own financial mismanagement to cover my tracks. The annual charity gala was held at the Beaumont Reserve, a sprawling neoclassical estate dripping with old money and rigid tradition. I handed my car keys to the valet, stepping out into the crisp evening air. The grand entrance was flanked by towering floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and silver branches. I walked through the heavy glass doors, letting the warmth of the foyer wash over my cold skin. The ballroom was packed to capacity, with investors, wealthy breeders, and local politicians holding crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne. A string quartet played a bright tempo in the corner, attempting to mask the hum of ruthless networking and hushed gossip. My entrance caused a physical ripple across the room. The laughter near the doorway died, instantly replaced by a sudden, suffocating vacuum of sound. Heads turned in unison. Eyes darted away, then snapped back, tracking my every movement. Whispers slithered through the crowd like a sudden winter draft extinguishing the warm atmosphere. I felt the collective weight of their judgment pressing heavily against my spine. These were the exact people my husband had defrauded. They were the victims of his $4 million theft, and thanks to the matriarch's poison, they believed I was the architect of their financial ruin. I did not lower my gaze. I did not shrink into the shadows near the coat check. I walked straight toward the center of the room, carrying myself with the grace of someone who possessed absolutely nothing to hide. I ordered a sparkling water from a passing waiter and positioned myself near the towering, cascading champagne fountain, waiting for the inevitable strike. It did not take long. Diane materialized from the dense crowd, parting the sea of tuxedoed men and gowned women with predatory ease. She wore emerald green velvet, a heavy diamond collar resting starkly against her collarbone. Her silver hair was styled into an immovable helmet of perfection. Two of her closest confidants flanked her, acting as silent enforcers for the public execution she was about to perform. The murmur of the surrounding guests faded into a tense, expectant silence. The attendees leaned in, hungry for a spectacle. They wanted the disgraced wife to crumble under the devastating weight of the matriarch's fury. "You possess a remarkable amount of audacity showing your face here tonight," Amber Diane began. Her voice was not a polite whisper. It was projected, calibrated perfectly to carry across the clinking crystal glasses and reach the ears of the syndicate investors standing nearby. I took a slow sip of my water, enjoying the chill of the ice. "It is a charity event, Diane. I always support the Equine Rescue Fund." "Do not patronize me," she snapped, stepping directly into my personal space. Her perfume, a heavy, suffocating blend of gardenia and musk, washed over me. "You think you can stand there in your mourning clothes and play the stoic victim? My son is missing. The authorities are tearing his company apart, and you are the one holding the bank accounts. We all know what you did. You drove him out, attempting to seize his life work, and now you are letting him take the blame for your pathetic greed." I could hear the faint clink of a fork dropping against a porcelain plate across the room. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Diane was trying to provoke a hysterical reaction. She needed me to scream, to cry, to defend myself wildly so she could label me unhinged and guilty in front of the county elite. I looked at the older woman studying the frantic tight lines around her mouth. Beneath the diamonds and the righteous rage, she was terrified. She knew, deep down, that her son was a fraud. She was simply trying to sacrifice me to save her own pristine legacy. I lowered my glass to waist height. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds, forcing her to endure the crushing weight of my calm. "Your son is a coward, Diane." The words sliced through the thick, humid air of the ballroom. Diane gasped, recoiling physically as if I had struck her across the jaw. The enforcers beside her widened their eyes in mute shock. "He stole from the very people standing in this room." I continued, my tone dropping into a flat, icy cadence that offered no quarter. "He forged documents, drained the accounts, and fled rather than face the consequences of his own inadequacy. I suggest you stop wasting your breath on me and go hire a very good defense lawyer for him. He is going to need it." I did not wait for a rebuttal. I turned my back on the matriarch, leaving her speechless and vibrating with fury next to the bubbling fountain. I walked toward the terrace doors, the crowd parting rapidly to let me pass, forming a wide berth around the woman who had just publicly dismantled the queen of the bluegrass elite. The night air outside was sharp and biting. I stood alone on the deserted stone balcony, inhaling the scent of distant rain and freshly cut grass. I had won the social battle, but the isolation was absolute. My community was gone. I was entirely alone in a fight against a ghost. Then my phone vibrated deep inside my silk clutch. It was not a text message. It was a push notification from an automated fraud monitoring service. When the federal agents froze my primary accounts that morning, they had missed a dormant emergency credit line attached to an old property management limited liability company I had set up years ago before the marriage. Wyatt was a signatory on that ancient account. I pulled the device from my bag, staring at the glowing screen in the dark. The display showed a pending charge. It was not an offshore airline ticket or a transaction in a tropical paradise. It was a security deposit processed exactly 5 minutes ago at a place called the Blackwood Hunting Lodge. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Blackwood was located barely 40 miles away, hidden deep in the Appalachian foothills. Why would a man fleeing a massive federal indictment book a local cabin under a traceable, forgotten card? The bizarre transaction completely shattered the narrative Wyatt had so carefully constructed. He was not relaxing on a beach in Mexico. He was hiding in the woods in our own backyard. I snapped my clutch shut, my heart hammering a new frantic rhythm against my ribs. The gala, the whispers, and the frozen bank accounts faded into the background. The rules of the game had just changed. The cold air of the deserted stone balcony offered a brief reprieve from the suffocating atmosphere of the charity gala. I stood in the dark, staring at the glowing screen of my smartphone. The automated fraud alert detailed a pending transaction for a security deposit at the Blackwood Hunting Lodge. I tapped the notification, authenticating my identity to view the full ledger. The account in question was a dormant commercial credit line attached to an old property management group I established a decade ago. Wyatt was a secondary signatory. But as my eyes scanned the digital receipt, a new, terrifying detail emerged. The authorized purchaser listed on the transaction was not my husband. The name printed in stark digital letters was Caleb. My pulse quickened, shifting into a rapid, calculating rhythm. I scrolled down, viewing a second pending charge processed just moments before the lodge deposit. It was a substantial payment made to a specialized tobacco importer located in downtown Lexington. The realization struck me like a physical weight. Caleb had stood in my kitchen that very morning, weeping over his drained bank accounts and his missing wife. He played the role of the shattered veterinarian to perfection. Now that same man was utilizing my forgotten corporate accounts to book remote cabins and purchase luxury contraband in the middle of the night. The human mind is a dangerous instrument when poisoned by betrayal. It connects dots that may not exist, constructing terrifying narratives out of fragmented evidence. I walked quickly through the empty corridors of the Beaumont Reserve, bypassing the grand ballroom entirely. I handed my ticket to the valet, sliding into the driver's seat of my car. During the dark drive back to my estate, paranoia bloomed in the confined space of the vehicle. I began evaluating everything I knew about Caleb. His equine clinic had been struggling for the past 2 years, facing stiff competition from corporate veterinary conglomerates. Last winter, he mentioned securing a second mortgage on his home just to keep his staff on the payroll. Financial desperation drives rational men to commit unforgivable acts. Did Caleb help Wyatt siphon the $4 million from the Thoroughbred Syndicate? Was Paige abandoning her family a tragic reality, or a calculated double-cross between thieves? I steered my car through the heavy iron gates of my property. The rain had slowed to a steady mist, coating the pastures in a damp silver sheen. I parked near the side entrance, bypassing the main foyer. I needed to search my own territory before the federal agents returned with more warrants, or Caleb decided to pay another unexpected visit. If Wyatt and Caleb were working together, the evidence would be hidden in a place the authorities would overlook. I walked down the long hallway toward the rear of the house, stopping in front of a heavy iron-reinforced door. I unlocked the deadbolt and descended the steep stone staircase into the ancestral bourbon aging cellar beneath the estate. The temperature dropped immediately, wrapping my skin in a deep subterranean chill. The air down here was thick, smelling of damp earth, charred oak, and the sweet, heavy scent of evaporating alcohol. Row upon row of wooden barrels stretched into the shadows, resting on heavy iron racks. This cellar was the heartbeat of my family legacy, a quiet sanctuary where time and patience created liquid gold. I moved methodically down the dim aisles, the heels of my boots clicking sharply against the cobblestone floor. A year ago, Wyatt demanded a small section of the vault for his own personal aging project, claiming he wanted to learn the family trade. I located his designated corner. 3 barrels sat isolated from the rest of the premium stock. I ran my hand over the rough wood, feeling a thick layer of undisturbed dust on the first 2. When my fingers brushed the 3rd barrel, the surface was pristine. Someone had been handling it recently. I grabbed a small iron pry bar from a nearby maintenance shelf. I wedged the flat edge under the top wooden hoop, applying steady pressure. The lid popped loose with a hollow, echoing crack. I peered inside, expecting to see the dark reflection of unaged whiskey. The barrel was bone dry. It was fitted with a false bottom, resting just a few inches below the rim. I lifted the wooden divider, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a polished mahogany humidor. I unlatched the brass clasp and opened the lid. The rich, earthy aroma of raw tobacco masked the smell of the surrounding bourbon. The box was packed tight with rare imported Cuban cigars. They were wrapped in distinctive black and gold bands, identifying them as a highly restricted blend, virtually impossible to acquire legally in the state of Kentucky. This was the exact luxury brand Caleb had just purchased, according to the credit card alert. I pulled one of the thick cigars from the box, turning it over in my fingers. The narrative seemed undeniable. Caleb was embedded in this conspiracy. He was buying Wyatt his favorite contraband and securing a remote location for them to hide. My only remaining ally was a traitor. A faint rumble vibrated through the cobblestone ceiling above my head. A vehicle had just pulled onto the gravel driveway near the side entrance. I placed the cigar in the pocket of my silk coat, leaving the humidor open. I walked back up the stone steps, my mind operating with cold, lethal precision. I was ready to face the man who helped dismantle my life. I opened the side door, stepping out onto the covered porch. Caleb stood near the hood of his mud-splattered truck. He looked even more haggard than he had that morning. His canvas jacket was soaked through, and his hands shook as he ran them over his face. He flinched when the heavy door clicked shut behind me. "You are up late, Caleb," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. I descended the porch steps, closing the distance between us. I suppose booking hunting lodges and buying imported tobacco requires long hours. His head snapped up, his eyes widening in sheer panic. He took a step back, raising his hands defensively. "Amber, listen to me. I can explain." "The credit card." I pulled the black and gold banded cigar from my pocket, holding it up in the dim porch light. "I found your hidden stash in the cellar." "How long have you been helping him steal from the syndicate, Caleb? Did you forge my signature? Or did Wyatt handle the paperwork while you managed the logistics?" "I did not steal anything," he said, his voice cracking under the strain. He leaned back against his truck, chest heaving. "Paige drained every account I own. When I tried to buy gas this afternoon, my debit card declined. I was digging through my wallet looking for spare cash, and I found that old commercial card from the charity board we served on 5 years ago. I knew it was tied to your dormant property group. I am sorry I used it, but I was desperate." "Desperate men buy groceries," I countered, my gaze fixed on his terrified face. "They do not buy cohibas and rent cabins in the Appalachian foothills." "I bought them for information," he pleaded, stepping forward. "The tobacco importer in Lexington is a shadow broker. He sources illegal goods for wealthy clients across the state. Wyatt uses him constantly. I drove down there, demanding to know where my wife was. The broker laughed in my face and told me to get out. He said he only talks to premium clients. So I used your corporate card to buy $1,000 worth of his finest stock. I shoved the box across his desk and told him to start talking. I lowered the cigar, analyzing the frantic sincerity in his eyes. The tobacco broker gave you the location. He gave me a clue, Caleb answered, running a hand through his soaked hair. He said Wyatt arranged a discreet drop-off for supplies at the Blackwood Hunting Lodge later this week. I used the card one more time to book the neighboring cabin. I am going up there, Amber. I am going to find Paige and demand she return the college money. I do not care about the federal investigation or the thoroughbred fraud. I just want my children to have a future. I stared at the broken man standing in the rain. The elaborate conspiracy I had constructed in my mind shattered, falling away like fragile glass. Caleb was not a criminal mastermind. He was a grieving father pushed to the edge, utilizing whatever meager tools he could find to salvage his family. My paranoia had nearly caused me to destroy the only person left in this county who shared my exact pain. This diversion served a vital purpose. It forced me to realize that fear was making me sloppy. Operating on suspicion and wild theories would only lead to my own destruction. If I was going to survive the crushing weight of the federal government, I could not rely on frantic guesses or midnight confrontations in the rain. I needed hard, undeniable evidence. I needed a paper trail so pristine and lethal that a grand jury would have no choice but to exonerate me. Cancel the reservation at Blackwood, I instructed, slipping the cigar back into my pocket. Do not go up into those woods alone. Wyatt is desperate, and desperate men do not negotiate. What are we supposed to do? Caleb asked, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The authorities think you are the architect of this fraud, and they do not care about my stolen savings. We are entirely outmatched. I looked past him toward the dark rolling pastures, realizing he was entirely correct. I was a solitary woman, armed only with a sharp mind and a locked house. That was insufficient to fight a systemic war. I needed a predator on my side. I needed someone who swam in the dark, murky waters of corporate litigation and emerged with blood on their teeth. Go home and get some sleep, Caleb, I said, turning back toward the house. Tomorrow morning, I am hiring a shark. The morning sun finally broke through the gray overcast, casting long, pale shadows across the front lawn. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the blank screen of my smartphone. The federal agents had given me 72 hours to produce a miracle. I had wasted 12 of them playing detective in the dark, chasing shadows, and nearly ruining my one remaining ally. I needed professional artillery. I needed a predator who understood the cold, unforgiving mechanics of corporate warfare. I scrolled through my contacts, bypassing the polite family attorneys and the local defense lawyers who played golf with the federal prosecutors. I stopped on a name I had not dialed in 5 years. Valerie Hastings. Valerie was a senior partner at a boutique litigation firm in Louisville. She possessed a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and entirely devoid of sentiment. Our previous introduction had been forged in open hostility. 5 years ago, she represented a commercial developer attempting to seize a pristine section of my ancestral pasture for a luxury housing subdivision. We spent 6 months locked in a bitter zoning dispute. I ultimately won preserving the land, but Valerie made every single day of that fight an agonizing, expensive nightmare. She did not take the loss personally. She simply packed up her briefcase, shook my hand, and told me to call her if I ever needed someone gutted. I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring. Valerie, I said, keeping my voice even, this is Amber Dunn. I assume you have seen the morning news. Her voice came through the speaker crisp and devoid of surprise. I read the initial filings over my morning coffee. The federal government is accusing you of orchestrating a $4 million embezzlement scheme hiding behind your husband's auto manufacturing logistics firm. They froze your assets, and they are preparing a grand jury indictment. Are you currently taking new clients? I asked. There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of a pen tapping against a hard desk. I charge a premium for lost causes, Amber. From where I sit, the paper trail has your name written all over it. The paper trail is a forgery, I replied. I need you here. I need someone who can dismantle a frame-up before Tuesday morning. I will be there in an hour, she said. The line went dead. 60 minutes later, a sleek charcoal sedan pulled up the gravel driveway. Valerie stepped out of the vehicle looking exactly as I remembered. She wore a pristine tailored gray suit, her dark hair cut into a razor-sharp bob that did not move in the morning breeze. She carried a heavy leather briefcase and walked with a rapid, purposeful stride that demanded immediate attention. She did not offer a sympathetic smile when I opened the door. She simply walked past me, her sharp eyes scanning the empty foyer and the stripped walls of the study. The feds were thorough, she noted, tossing her briefcase onto the bare mahogany desk. They took your ledgers, your hard drives, and every scrap of paper that could verify your defense. They left me with 72 hours, I said, standing in the doorway. Valerie unclasped her briefcase, pulling out a thick encrypted laptop and a portable scanner. 72 hours is an eternity if you know where to look. Sit down, Amber. We are going to reconstruct your husband's entire financial life using nothing but the breadcrumbs they left behind. For the next 10 hours, my quiet study transformed into a war room. We worked through the afternoon and deep into the night, fueled by bitter black coffee and sheer adrenaline. The contrast between our methods was stark, but highly effective. Valerie operated with a rapid-fire clinical energy, citing federal banking statutes and reciting corporate loopholes from memory. I provided the methodical organization, mapping out Wyatt's behavioral patterns, his travel schedules, and his network of shell companies, using the fragments of information Caleb had given me. Valerie routed her laptop through a secure virtual private network, accessing public corporate registries and international shipping manifests. She began cross-referencing the dates Wyatt transferred funds out of the Thoroughbred Syndicate with the cargo manifests from his logistics firm. Look at this, Valerie said, tapping the glowing screen with the tip of her pen. Wyatt Logistics primarily ships heavy machinery and imported car chassis. These freight invoices from last October show a sudden spike in transit costs for shipments moving through a port in Central America. I leaned over her shoulder, studying the dense rows of alphanumeric tracking codes. He always complained about international tariffs, I murmured. He claimed the costs were unavoidable. They are not tariffs, Valerie said, a sharp edge of triumph in her voice. He was inflating the shipping manifests. A cargo container weighs the same whether the invoice claims the contents are worth $50,000 or $500,000. He was overbilling the thoroughbred investors, disguising the theft as legitimate equipment purchases for his trucking fleet. She highlighted a long string of characters at the bottom of the digital invoice. This tracking code is too long for standard freight. He embedded the offshore routing numbers directly into the alphanumeric shipping tags. He funneled the excess syndicate money straight to the Cayman Islands, using fake logistics bills to justify the outflow. The brilliance of his deception sent a cold chill down my spine. He had turned a mundane trucking company into an invisible money laundering machine. And he had used Paige to help him falsify the receiving documents. We have the mechanism, I said, stepping back from the desk. We can show the FBI how he moved the money. This proves he committed the fraud. Valerie closed the laptop, a loud snap echoing in the quiet room. She leaned back in the leather chair, studying me with a cold, pragmatic gaze. It proves the fraud happened, Amber. It does not prove you are innocent. I frowned, the exhaustion settling deep into my bones. The routing numbers point to his shipments. He manages the fleet. And you manage the wealth, Valerie countered her tone, dropping into a harsh, unyielding rhythm. You need to understand a brutal truth about the Department of Justice. The FBI does not care about the truth. They care about securing convictions. They have a federal warrant, a frozen bank account, and a wire transfer document bearing your perfect signature. From their perspective, Wyatt is just a middleman who fled. You are the wealthy estate owner holding the bag. If we walk in there with a theory about inflated shipping invoices, they will simply argue that you ordered him to do it. The silence in the room grew heavy. The reality of my situation pressed against my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. Playing defense, explaining the mechanics of the crime was insufficient. The federal prosecutors would twist any ambiguity into a weapon against me. So how do we survive? I asked. We stop playing defense, Valerie said, standing up and packing her charger into the briefcase. We start setting a trap. To beat a forged paper trail, you need a better, deadlier paper trail. Wyatt is a meticulous, arrogant man. He orchestrated a $4 million heist and double-crossed his own mistress. A man like that does not trust digital files alone. He knows servers can be hacked and hard drives can be wiped. He is old school. He keeps a physical ledger. I whispered, the realization dawning on me. He would need a tangible record of his shell companies, the hidden routing numbers and the exact balances to ensure his accomplices were not robbing him. Exactly, Valerie nodded. He would keep a master ledger. A physical book tying his specific handwriting to every stolen dime. If we hand that ledger to the federal prosecutor, your forged signature becomes worthless. The question is, where does a paranoid criminal hide his most valuable possession before fleeing the state? My mind raced back to the events of the previous night. The dark stone walls of the ancestral vault. The heavy smell of evaporating alcohol, the pristine wooden barrel sitting in the corner, untouched by dust. I had opened the false bottom and found the box of imported tobacco. I assumed the cigars were the only prize hidden inside, leaving the barrel behind to confront Caleb in the rain. But a false bottom could easily conceal more than a mahogany humidor. He did not take it with him, I said, my voice steadying as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The ledger is still in this house. The air inside the subterranean vault carried the heavy scent of charred oak and dormant thyme. I led Valerie down the steep stone steps, holding a heavy iron flashlight to illuminate the dim passageway. The heels of our shoes clicked in unison against the cold cobblestone floor. The temperature dropped significantly, wrapping my skin in a deep, frigid chill. I navigated through the labyrinth of wooden casks, moving past the premium reserves, until we reached the isolated corner Wyatt had claimed for himself. Valerie stood back, her sharp eyes, scanning the 3 pristine barrels resting on the lower rack. You believe your husband hid a master ledger inside a whiskey cask? She asked. Her tone held a measure of pragmatic skepticism. It is a bit theatrical, even for a desperate corporate thief. Men who steal millions of dollars harbor inflated senses of their own brilliance, I replied. They view themselves as untouchable. Wyatt loved the aesthetics of wealth and secrecy. Hiding his true nature inside my family legacy is exactly the kind of arrogant poetry he would appreciate. I picked up the iron pry bar from the nearby maintenance shelf. I wedged the flat edge under the wooden rim of the 3rd barrel, applying a steady downward pressure. The lid popped loose with a hollow, resonant crack echoing into the shadows of the cellar. I lifted the false bottom, exposing the hidden compartment. The polished mahogany humidor sat exactly where I had left it when Caleb inadvertently interrupted my search the night before. I pulled the heavy cigar box out and handed it to Valerie. She flipped the brass latch, opening the lid. The rich, earthy aroma of raw tobacco filled the space between us. Imported Cubans, she noted, inspecting the black and gold bands. A pricey habit, but smuggling tobacco will not satisfy a federal grand jury. That was the decoy, I said, turning back to the open barrel. I handed the flashlight to Valerie, asking her to shine the beam directly into the dark recess. I rolled up the sleeve of my silk blouse and reached deep into the cavity. My fingers brushed the rough wooden staves, tracing the curvature of the bottom. Beneath the space where the humidor had rested, the wood felt uneven. There was a secondary panel, a thin sheet of cedar fitted snugly against the floor of the barrel. I pressed my fingernails into the narrow seam, applying leverage until the false floor shifted. I slid the panel aside. My fingertips grazed the smooth, cold surface of oiled leather. I pulled the object from the shadows. It was a thick, leather-bound notebook wrapped tightly in a waterproof protective sleeve. We brought the notebook upstairs, walking back into the bright, clinical lighting of my stripped study. I placed the ledger in the center of the mahogany desk. Valerie unzipped the protective sleeve and opened the heavy leather cover. The pages were filled with dense, cramped handwriting, holding columns of alphanumeric codes, dates, and staggering financial figures. Valerie pulled her chair closer, leaning over the yellowed pages. Her eyes darted across the columns, tracing the ink with the tip of her silver pen. The clinical detachment in her posture shifted into predatory focus. "This is the central nervous system of his entire operation," she murmured. "He documented every single fraudulent transaction." She opened her encrypted laptop, placing it beside the open notebook. For the next hour, she cross-referenced the handwritten dates with the digital breadcrumbs we had uncovered earlier. The physical ledger provided the missing cipher. Wyatt had listed the names of the legitimate thoroughbred investors on the left side of the page, mapping their capital deposits. On the right side, he recorded the inflated logistics invoices, tying specific offshore routing numbers to every stolen dollar. As I studied the open pages, a cold, distinct realization settled into my bones. The handwriting on the first 30 pages belonged to Wyatt. His sharp, aggressive penmanship was unmistakable. But midway through the ledger, the script changed. The hard angles softened into rounded loops. The letters slanted slightly to the right, carrying a careless, fluid elegance. I stared at the ink, feeling a sudden, sharp twist in my chest. It was a familiar handwriting. I had seen it on countless birthday cards, handwritten thank you notes, and hastily scribbled grocery lists left on my kitchen counter over the past decade. "Paige," I whispered, tracing the rounded loops of the ink. Valerie stopped typing. She looked up, adjusting her posture. "Your best friend." "She did not just run away with him," I said, my voice dropping to a hollow cadence. I pointed to the specific columns written in Paige's distinct hand. "Look at what she is logging here. These are the falsified shipping manifests. She was managing the intake of the fraudulent cargo bills. Paige was his active accomplice." The depth of the betrayal fractured the remaining illusions I held about the people in my life. Paige was not a foolish romantic swept away by a charismatic man promising a tropical escape. She was a calculated operative who knowingly helped dismantle my family legacy to line her own pockets. She sat at my dining table, drinking my wine, while secretly managing the very ledgers that would eventually invite the FBI to my front door. Valerie leaned closer, inspecting the specific routing numbers Paige had recorded. A deep frown creased her forehead. She pulled a calculator from her briefcase and began punching in the handwritten figures, comparing them to the total sums Wyatt had listed on the previous pages. "The numbers do not balance," Valerie announced, tapping the digital display on the calculator. "Your husband is a meticulous thief, but your best friend is a greedy one." She turned the ledger toward me, pointing to a subtle discrepancy in the final column. Wyatt authorized a transfer of $1.2 million. But the routing number Page logged here only deposits $1 million into his primary Cayman account. She skimmed $200,000 off the top and routed it to a secondary holding trust. Valerie flipped through the subsequent pages, running the calculations again and again. The pattern repeated itself across every major transaction. Page was systematically shorting the offshore deposits, funneling a percentage of the stolen capital into a hidden account she controlled. "There is no honor among thieves," Valerie said, a grim smile touching her lips. Wyatt was robbing the syndicate, but Page was robbing Wyatt. The narrative Wyatt had attempted to sell me through his initial text message shattered entirely. He did not run away with Page out of blind passion or twisted love. The romantic getaway was a myth, a convenient lie constructed to explain a sudden, desperate flight. Wyatt had discovered his mistress was skimming his stolen funds. The conspiracy was collapsing from the inside, poisoned by mutual greed. He framed me to cover his tracks and cut ties with the woman who was bleeding his accounts dry. Valerie turned to the final pages of the leather-bound book. "If they were turning on each other," she murmured, "then where did the bulk of the money actually go?" We studied the last entry in the ledger. The final string of routing numbers did not possess the familiar international codes of Caribbean tax havens. Valerie typed the sequence into her laptop, accessing a restricted financial registry. A few seconds later, the screen populated with a domestic property deed. "The money never left the country," Valerie stated, reading the glowing text. "He washed the stolen capital through a dozen offshore shells just to bring it right back to domestic soil. The final destination is a blind trust registered in the state of Kentucky." I looked at the address listed on the property deed. It was a location I recognized immediately from the frantic credit card alert the night before. The Blackwood Hunting Lodge. "He is hiding in the Appalachian foothills," I said, my pulse steadying into a calm, lethal rhythm. "He is barely an hour away from this estate. We have the location and we have the paper trail," Valerie said, closing the heavy leather ledger. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "But we still have a critical problem, Amber." I met her sharp gaze, anticipating the legal hurdle. "A physical ledger is circumstantial." "It is a piece of paper," Valerie confirmed. "A slick federal defense attorney will look at this book and argue that you forced your husband to maintain it. They will claim you orchestrated the entire fraud and ordered him to keep meticulous records of your empire. The FBI wants you. They have your forged signature on a wire transfer and a narrative that fits their timeline perfectly." "Then how do we clear my name?" I asked. "We need a definitive recorded confession," Valerie answered, her tone flat and uncompromising. "We need Wyatt to speak the truth out loud, detailing his solitary guilt and his specific methods of forging your name. We need to hand the federal prosecutor an audio file so toxic that no defense attorney in the country can spin it." She looked at the dark windows staring out into the rainy Kentucky morning. "But a paranoid man hiding in the woods will not simply confess to a crime. We have to bait him into the open. We have to make him believe he is still holding all the cards while we walk him straight into a trap." The rain had finally stopped, leaving the estate wrapped in a heavy, damp silence. I sat across from Valerie in the study, staring at the leather-bound ledger resting on the desk between us. We had the blueprint of the fraud and the location of the stolen money. We lacked the voice of the thief. The federal prosecutors required a neatly packaged confession to dismiss their forged paper trail. The sharp, shrill ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet room. The device vibrated against the polished mahogany surface. The screen displayed an unknown, out-of-state number originating from a southern Texas area code. Under normal circumstances, I would let an unrecognized caller filter into voicemail. Today, ordinary rules no longer applied. I picked up the device and pressed the green icon, putting the call on speaker. An automated operator spoke first, delivering a sterile, pre-recorded message. You have a collect call from an inmate at the Hidalgo County Correctional Facility. Press 1 to accept the charges. Valerie raised an eyebrow, pausing her typing. I pressed the numeric key. Amber, a voice whispered. It was frantic, hollow and raw, trembling with a desperate edge that sent a cold ripple down my spine. I knew that voice instantly. It belonged to the woman who used to drink chilled Chardonnay on my patio and complain about her husband working too many late shifts at the veterinary clinic. It was the voice of the woman who held my hand at my mother's funeral and then helped my husband forge shipping manifests to steal millions of dollars. Paige, I said, my tone perfectly flat, devoid of any warmth or surprise. Oh, thank God, Paige sobbed. The sound of her weeping echoed through the small speaker, followed by the harsh, metallic clang of a heavy door shutting in the background. You answered. Amber, you have to help me. You have to get me out of here. I leaned back in my leather chair, tracing the smooth ceramic rim of my coffee mug. The irony of her plea was almost physical. She had drained her own children's college funds and boarded a plane to abandon her life, relying on stolen wealth to build a tropical paradise. Now she was calling the woman she betrayed, begging for salvation from a border town jail cell. Where is Wyatt? I asked, ignoring her tears, focusing entirely on gathering the intelligence Valerie and I needed. He left me. Paige choked out, her voice dropping into a ragged whisper. He left me on the side of a highway near McAllen. He found out Amber. He checked the secondary holding accounts while we were driving south. He realized I had been taking a cut of the offshore deposits. He pulled the car over to the shoulder, dragged me out of the passenger seat, and threw my suitcase into a ditch. He took my passport. He took the cash. He drove away and left me standing in the dirt. The narrative she spun aligned perfectly with the discrepancies we found in the ledger. The conspiracy had imploded under the weight of their mutual greed. How did you end up in a county jail? I asked, keeping my voice even. I had nothing, she cried. He took my phone. I walked for 5 miles until I found a gas station. I was starving and terrified. I tried to take a sandwich and a prepaid phone card from the shelf. The owner caught me and called the local police. They booked me for petty theft. Amber. I am wearing a scratchy uniform and sleeping on a concrete bench. There are women in this holding cell who terrify me. You have to wire the bail money. It is only $500. Please, just call the bondsman and send the money. I looked across the desk at Valerie. The attorney sat perfectly still, her sharp eyes locked on the phone. She held up her encrypted laptop and tapped a key, activating a digital audio recording software. A red circle blinked on the screen, capturing every word echoing through the speaker. You helped him steal $4 million from the thoroughbred syndicate Paige I stayed, steering the conversation deliberately toward the facts we needed her to verify. You forged those shipping invoices. You drained Caleb's bank accounts. Now you want me to wire you bail money? The line went silent for 3 heavy seconds. The desperate weeping stopped, replaced by a sudden, chilling shift in her tone. The terrified prisoner vanished, leaving behind the calculating operative who had coveted my life for a decade. Do not play the righteous victim with me, Amber Paige hissed, her voice turning sharp and venomous. I know what the federal investigators are doing. Wyatt told me everything before we left. He forged your signature on the Cayman wire transfers. The FBI thinks you orchestrated the entire fraud. If you do not pay my bail right now, I will call the federal prosecutor in Lexington. I will tell them I was acting under your direct orders. I will testify that you forced Wyatt and me to falsify those manifests. I will hand them the exact narrative they want, and I will watch you burn. She was a cornered animal lashing out with the only weapon she possessed. She thought she was holding a loaded gun to my head. She did not realize she was digging her own grave with every syllable she uttered. I did not raise my voice. I did not betray a single ounce of fear or anger. I continued to trace the rim of my ceramic mug, feeling the lingering heat of the dark roast coffee. "You are going to testify that you were my accomplice?" I asked, keeping my cadence slow and deliberate. "You are going to admit to a federal prosecutor that you actively participated in wire fraud and embezzlement just to spite me. I will do whatever it takes to survive." Paige spat back. "You have millions in your family trust. $500 is nothing to you. Wire the money, Amber, or I swear I will end you." Valerie caught my eye and gave a slow, deliberate nod. We had it. The audio file was secure. Paige had just confessed to the crime, acknowledged Wyatt's forgery, and attempted to extort a federal witness on a recorded line. "You made your bed, Paige," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper of absolute ice. "I hope it is comfortable." "Wait, Amber. Do not." Paige started, her voice pitching back into panic, realizing her threat had failed to secure her freedom. I tapped the red icon on the screen, ending the call. The dial tone hummed for a brief second before the room fell back into a heavy silence. I set the phone face down on the mahogany desk. Valerie saved the audio file to an encrypted folder on her hard drive. She leaned back in her chair, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of her mouth. "That was a masterclass in tactical patience, Amber. We just secured a verified confession of her complicity and an admission of his forgery." "She is a wild card," I noted, staring at the dark screen of my phone. "She is desperate angry and sitting in a Texas holding cell. When she realizes I am not sending the bail money, she might actually follow through and call the federal field office." "Let her call them," Valerie replied, waving a dismissive hand. "If she tries to sell them a story about you being the mastermind, we will hand the prosecutor this recording, proving she attempted to extort you with that exact lie. She just destroyed her own credibility as a witness. The government cannot use her against you now." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the rolling green pastures of my estate. The gray clouds were finally beginning to break, allowing narrow shafts of pale sunlight to touch the damp grass. We held the psychological high ground. We had the physical ledger detailing the movement of the stolen capital. We had an audio recording proving Paige was an active conspirator and confirming Wyatt fabricated the paper trail against me. But the core problem remained unresolved. Paige's confession protected me from her extortion, but it did not provide the definitive proof required to clear my name entirely. The FBI still held a wire transfer bearing my signature. They still viewed me as the primary suspect, sitting in a sprawling estate while my husband remained a fugitive. We had neutralized the accomplice, but the architect of the fraud was still hiding in the Appalachian foothills, breathing free air and holding the stolen wealth. "We need to force him out of the woods," I said, turning back to face the corporate shark sitting at my desk. "We need Wyatt to speak the truth, on the record." Valerie tapped her silver pen against the leather notebook. "A man hiding from a federal indictment does not step into the light unless he believes he is stepping into a victory. We have to offer him a prize so irresistible, he forgets to check for the snare." Before I could formulate a response, my laptop chimed. A new notification appeared in the corner of the screen, indicating an incoming encrypted email. I walked around the desk and opened the message. The sender address was a randomized string of characters masking the origin point. The subject line was blank. I clicked the text, allowing the body of the message to load. As I read the words, A cold, grim satisfaction settled deep into my chest. Wyatt had finally decided to reach out. The architect was preparing to offer his terms, setting the stage for a final, devastating collision. The cursor hovered over the randomized sender address on my laptop screen. The encrypted message sat in my inbox like a dormant explosive, waiting for a single click to detonate. The study was silent, except for the faint hum of the computer cooling fan and the steady rhythm of rain dripping from the copper gutters outside. Valerie sat across the mahogany desk sipping her black coffee. Her sharp eyes tracked my every movement, anticipating the next strike from our invisible enemy. I pressed the trackpad. The decryption software ran for a few tense seconds before the body of the email materialized. The stark white background cast a pale blue light across my face. The message began with a sickening familiarity. Amber, my love. Wyatt had always been a gifted salesman. Early in our marriage, he used that same warm, persuasive cadence to convince local bank managers to finance his first fleet of transport trucks. He knew how to mirror a person's desires, how to lower their defenses with a carefully constructed illusion of empathy. He was utilizing that exact psychological tool now, attempting to sell me my own salvation. He wrote about the federal investigators as if they were a mutual nuisance, rather than a pack of wolves he had directed to my door. He acknowledged the pressure I was enduring under the asset freeze. He claimed he never wanted things to escalate to this level of government scrutiny. The prose was dripping with his signature manipulative charm, offering a lifeline disguised as an olive branch. Then he presented the negotiation. Wyatt offered to record a sworn, notarized video confession. He promised to detail his solo operation, outline the mechanics of the embezzlement, and state on the record that he forged my signature on the Cayman Island wire transfers. It was the exact prize Valerie and I had been trying to extract. A video confession would obliterate the federal case against me, instantly clearing my name and lifting the suffocating weight of the grand jury indictment. But a man like Wyatt never offers salvation without a steep, devastating price. The next paragraph outlined his demand. He had attached a dense digital legal contract to the email. It was a proxy transfer of voting rights for Wyatt Logistics. While the federal authorities were seizing his illicit offshore funds, the trucking firm itself still held legitimate hard assets. There were commercial warehouses, fleets of transport vehicles, and valuable real estate scattered across the Midwest. As his wife and a managing partner on our estate trusts, I possessed the legal authority to freeze those domestic assets during the investigation. He wanted me to sign away that leverage. He intended to transfer control of the board to a proxy firm he controlled, allowing him to liquidate the clean side of the business from the shadows. He needed that clean capital to fund a comfortable life as a fugitive. He did not rely on asking nicely to secure my cooperation. Wyatt operated through leverage and terror. The final lines of the email contained his true weapon. I left an insurance policy attached, he wrote. Listen to it carefully. You have 24 hours to sign the proxy transfer. I noticed a small audio file attached at the bottom of the message. I reached for the mouse, my pulse maintaining a steady, calm rhythm. I clicked the play icon. The sound that emerged from the laptop speakers froze the blood in my veins. It was my voice. The pitch, the specific pacing, the slight southern inflection cultivated from a lifetime in the Kentucky bluegrass were all flawless. The voice breathed softly before speaking a string of sentences I had never uttered in my entire life. Make sure the thoroughbred funds route through the Cayman Trust, the voice instructed. The tone was impatient, carrying my exact signature cadence when I was dealing with difficult contractors. If the syndicate investors ask for a quarterly audit, tell them the capital is locked in the new logistics fleet. Do not Leave a paper trail, Wyatt. The audio clipped and faded out, lasting barely 15 seconds. The sheer terror of the technology left me motionless. It was a synthetic fabrication stitched together from countless voicemails, home videos, and casual conversations he had secretly recorded over the past year. Wyatt had used artificial intelligence to generate a deepfake of my voice, confessing to the core mechanics of the federal crime. If he sent that audio file to the prosecutor, the forgery on the wire transfer would transform from a suspicious anomaly into undeniable truth. The FBI would not waste time running digital forensic diagnostics on a 15-second audio clip. They would play it for a grand jury and secure my immediate arrest. Wyatt had weaponized my own identity against me, trying to force me to hand over the keys to his empire. The deadline was set for tomorrow at noon. One rotation of the clock to sign away my leverage or face a guaranteed prison sentence. He expected me to panic. He expected the refined estate wife to break under the crushing psychological weight of a fabricated confession. He anticipated a frantic reply, begging for mercy and promising immediate compliance. Instead, a grim, hollow smile touched the corners of my lips. The fear he intended to instill evaporated, replaced by a cold, pristine clarity. Wyatt had just made a fatal strategic error. In his arrogance and his desperate need for clean capital, he had reached out from the shadows and handed me the very chain I needed to drag him into the light. I tapped the trackpad, forwarding the entire encrypted message, the proxy contract, and the synthetic audio file directly to Valerie. She opened the email on her end, the blue light from her screen illuminating her sharp features. She put on a pair of silver reading glasses and scanned the text. When she clicked the audio file, my stolen voice echoed through the quiet study a second time. Valerie did not flinch. She listened to the synthetic threat and then closed the media player with a swift, decisive keystroke. I looked across the desk, leaning back into the leather chair. He just gave us exactly what we need to bury him, I said. Valerie pulled off her glasses, a predatory gleam shining in her dark eyes. He is a remarkable fool, Amber. He believes he is playing a game of chess, but he just handed us the board. She turned her laptop around, pointing to the digital contract he had attached. To execute a proxy transfer of corporate voting rights, he needs a biometric signature or a physical notary stamp authenticated by a licensed official. He cannot simply accept a digital signature for a transfer of this magnitude while the company is under active federal investigation. The banks will flag an electronic signature as fraudulent within an hour. He knows that I countered. He thinks he can bypass the banks by using the proxy firm to wash the asset sale. But the proxy firm still requires your physical thumbprint drive to authorize the release of the marital hold, Valerie explained, her voice dropping into a rapid strategic rhythm. That is the systemic loophole we use to bait the trap. This deepfake audio is a terrifying piece of leverage, but it is also a documented instance of interstate extortion. By sending this, he just committed 3 new federal felonies. But we are not going to show this to the FBI yet. Why not? I asked, studying the shark sitting in my home. Because if we give the FBI this email, they will trace the origin server and raid whatever cabin he is hiding in, Valerie stated. They will arrest him, but they will still hold the forged wire transfer against you. They might argue you created the deepfake yourself to muddy the waters. We need him to speak his guilt on a live recording. We need to lure him out of the Appalachian foothills and put him in a room with you. I looked at the digital clock on the desk. The 24-hour countdown was already ticking. How do we force a paranoid fugitive to risk a physical meeting? We play the role he wrote for you, Valerie said, typing rapidly on her keyboard, drafting a response. We reply to this email wrapped in total panic. We tell him you concede. We tell him you are terrified of the deepfake and you are ready to sign the proxy transfer to save yourself. But we insert one critical, insurmountable obstacle. She hit the spacebar, emphasizing the final point. We tell him the estate attorneys locked the corporate voting rights behind a physical biometric thumbprint drive. We tell him the digital contract is useless without the hardware. If he wants the clean capital, he has to meet you in person to collect the physical drive. A fugitive will not risk stepping onto my property, I noted. He knows the feds are watching this house. He will not come here, Valerie agreed. He will demand a neutral location, somewhere isolated, somewhere he believes he controls the environment. And when he arrives, expecting to collect a thumbprint drive from a broken, terrified wife, he is going to find a woman wearing a federal wire. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Wyatt was blinded by his own greed and his desperate need to secure his financial future. We were going to use his ultimate ultimatum as the bait for his own destruction. I reached for my keyboard, ready to type the frantic, terrified reply that would seal my husband's fate. The federal courthouse in downtown Lexington was a monolithic structure of pale concrete and tinted glass, designed to make every citizen who entered feel remarkably small. I walked through the metal detectors side by side with Valerie. The security guards inspected my designer handbag and Valerie's leather briefcase. They had no idea the real weapon we carried was a handwritten, leather-bound notebook hidden inside a simple manila envelope. We took the elevator to the 6th floor. The air conditioning in the hallway blew cold, carrying the faint, sterile scent of floor wax and ozone. We were scheduled to meet with Assistant United States Attorney Harrison Vance. Vance was a career prosecutor, a man who climbed the political ladder by locking up corrupt politicians and wealthy tax evaders. He possessed a reputation for being immovable. When we stepped into his corner office, he barely looked up from his dual monitors. Agent Donovan stood by the window, his arms crossed his damp raincoat, still hanging over the back of a chair. "You have 20 minutes, Valerie Vance stated, checking his silver wristwatch. "I assume you are here to negotiate a plea deal for your client before the grand jury convenes tomorrow." Valerie did not bother with pleasantries. She walked directly to his polished mahogany desk and dropped the heavy bourbon cellar ledger right onto his pristine blotter. The thud made Donovan turn away from the window. "We are not here to negotiate a plea," Valerie said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We are here to dictate the terms of my client's conditional immunity." Vance scoffed, leaning back in his executive chair. "Your client has a forged wire transfer bearing her signature, moving stolen thoroughbred capital into offshore shells. Immunity is not on the table." Valerie opened her laptop and connected a small portable speaker. Without breaking eye contact with the prosecutor, she clicked play. Paige's desperate weeping filled the sterile office, followed by her venomous threat to falsely testify against me if I refused to pay her Texas bail. When the recording finished, Valerie pulled up the synthetic deepfake audio Wyatt had emailed the night before. My stolen voice echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles, confessing to crimes I never committed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vance sat forward, his arrogant posture dissolving into rigid attention. Donovan walked over to the desk, staring at the physical ledger. My client did not steal $4 million. Valerie continued driving the blade deep. Her husband orchestrated the entire fraud. He utilized an active accomplice to falsify shipping manifests. He created a synthetic digital confession to extort his own wife. And he maintained a physical ledger detailing every routing number and hidden shell account. The FBI spent the last week chasing a ghost, while the real evidence was buried under a whiskey barrel. Vance flipped open the leather cover of the ledger. His eyes scanned the columns of alphanumeric codes and the alternating handwriting. The systemic machinery of the federal government was a slow-turning ship, but I could see the exact moment the rudder shifted. The prosecutor realized the narrative his agents had built was entirely compromised. If he indicted me and Valerie presented this evidence to a jury, the government would suffer a humiliating public defeat. "What do you want?" Vance asked, his tone shedding its previous arrogance. "Total blanket immunity for Amber Dunn," Valerie stated. "Exoneration in the public record and the immediate release of her frozen domestic assets." Vance steepled his fingers, resting his chin against his hands. "I can offer conditional immunity. The condition is that we secure the architect of the fraud. This ledger proves why it moved the money, but a skilled defense attorney could argue he created these records under duress. We need him in custody, and we need a verbal admission on a recorded wire. We need to lure him out of the Appalachian foothills." I sat in the leather guest chair, maintaining my stoic posture. The transition was profound. The crushing weight of the federal bureaucracy was no longer bearing down on my shoulders. The vast power of the Justice Department had pivoted, aligning itself behind me. I was no longer the prey. I was deputized as the hunter. "My husband demanded a proxy transfer of his corporate voting rights," I said, breaking my silence. "He sent an encrypted email demanding I sign away the domestic assets within 24 hours. I can use that demand to draw him into the open." Donovan stepped forward, his brow furrowed in skepticism. "A fugitive running from a federal indictment will not risk a physical meeting. He will insist on a digital transfer." "Not if a digital transfer is impossible," I countered. Vance pushed his keyboard toward me. "Show us." I pulled my chair closer to the desk, opening the secure email portal on the government terminal. I stared at the blank reply screen, preparing to deliver the performance of my life. I had to channel the terrified, broken wife Wyatt expected to find. I needed to feed his ego and weaponize his greed. I typed rapidly, letting deliberate grammatical errors slip into the text to simulate trembling hands. I begged him not to release the fake audio to the authorities. I promised I would surrender the company and sign the proxy contract to save myself. I crafted a persona of total surrender. Then I planted the hook. I typed out a frantic explanation, claiming my estate attorneys had instituted a lockdown protocol when the FBI raided the house. I told him a standard digital signature would trigger an automatic federal freeze on the remaining corporate shares. The only way to authorize the handover and release the clean capital was by utilizing a physical biometric thumbprint drive. I insisted the digital contract was useless without the hardware. If he wanted his money to fund his escape, he had to meet me in person to collect the drive. I hit send. The waiting was a distinct form of psychological torture. The four of us sat in the prosecutor's office staring at the computer monitor. The digital clock in the corner of the screen ticked away the minutes. The fate of my freedom rested entirely on Wyatt's arrogance. Would his paranoia keep him hidden in the woods, or would his desperate need for a quick financial payout cloud his judgment? 32 minutes later, a bright ping echoed through the room. A new encrypted message appeared in the inbox. I clicked open the email. Wyatt had taken the bait. His reply was short, condescending, and dripping with unearned triumph. He mocked my panic and dictated the terms of our rendezvous, believing he was in control of the board. He refused to meet anywhere near a public road or a commercial building. He chose dusk. He chose the remote perimeter of my own property, specifically the abandoned tack room near the old thoroughbred stables. He picked that location because he knew the cell service there was virtually non-existent, assuming it would thwart any potential law enforcement surveillance. He did not know I had installed a closed-circuit security system in those stables months ago. The digital trap had snapped shut flawlessly. "We have him," Donovan said, pulling his radio from his belt to summon his tactical team. "We will wire you up and position a strike team in the tree line." I stared at the location on the screen. The federal agents were celebrating the tactical victory, but a new, chilling reality began to settle in my chest. To secure my freedom, I had to walk into the fading Kentucky sunlight and face the man who tried to destroy my life. I had to stand alone in a dark wooden room with a desperate criminal relying on a hidden microphone while hoping his paranoia did not lead him to search me before he confessed. The digital game was over. The physical confrontation was about to begin. The drive back to the estate felt entirely different this time around. I was no longer a fugitive operating within the confines of my own life. I had transformed into the architect of a federal sting operation. Sitting in the passenger seat of Valerie's sedan, I drafted the final parameters of the rendezvous. I typed the coordinates into the encrypted portal detailing a very specific structure located on the extreme southern perimeter of my land. It was a rustic, sprawling barn primarily used for storing surplus equestrian equipment and housing foaling mares during the bitter winter months. Connected to the main stalls was an old, oversized tack room. I chose this exact location for a reason that bordered on poetic justice. When my grandfather passed down the breeding operation, I invested a substantial amount of capital upgrading the infrastructure. That included a military-grade surveillance matrix. The thoroughbreds grazing in those pastures represented millions of dollars in genetic lineage. Protecting them remained my highest priority. I had hired a private security firm to install covert, high-definition cameras equipped with thermal imaging and omnidirectional microphones. The technicians integrated the lenses seamlessly into the wooden rafters and hollowed-out iron feed bins. Wyatt had always despised that particular expenditure. He routinely mocked the installation, calling it paranoid overkill and a spectacular waste of liquid assets. He argued that a simple padlock and a basic alarm were sufficient for a bunch of farm animals. His arrogance blinded him to the value of anything he did not personally control. Furthermore, he knew the southern ridge was a notorious cellular dead zone. The geography dipped into a shallow valley, shielding the area from local transmission towers. He felt perfectly safe accepting my designated meeting spot, because he assumed the lack of cellular reception would render any standard law enforcement wire useless. He believed he was walking into a digital blind spot. He had forgotten a crucial detail regarding the infrastructure. My security grid did not rely on cellular data transmissions. It was a closed-circuit system hardwired directly through buried fiber optic cables connecting straight to the main estate server. Agent Donovan and his tactical team did not park their fleet of vehicles in my circular driveway. They established their command post 2 miles down the highway, occupying an abandoned county maintenance garage hidden behind a dense thicket of weeping willows. Valerie sat beside Donovan in the back of a mobile surveillance van, watching the feeds illuminate a bank of glowing monitors. I stood inside my master bedroom, staring at my reflection one last time. I needed a physical barrier to separate my vulnerable core from the predator I was about to face. I reached into the closet and pulled out my signature camel-colored trench coat. The heavy tailored gabardine felt like tactical armor wrapping around my shoulders, adding rigid structure to my posture. I slipped the small biometric thumbprint drive into my right pocket, feeling the cold metal casing against my fingertips. The small earpiece Donovan provided fit snugly deep inside my ear canal, practically invisible beneath my pinned-back hair. It was a one-way receiver, allowing the command post to communicate with me if the situation deteriorated. I tapped the microscopic device once, signaling my readiness. Donovan's voice crackled through the tiny speaker inside my ear. "We have full visual, Mrs. Dunn. The resolution is crystal clear. We are capturing every sound in that barn. You hold the leverage now. Make him talk." I stepped out the back door and began the long walk toward the southern ridge. The fading Kentucky sunlight painted the sky in bruised shades of violet and deep amber. A cool evening breeze swept across the bluegrass, carrying the metallic scent of impending dusk. Beneath my boots, the crushed gravel driveway crunched with a loud, rhythmic cadence. Each step felt deliberate, heavy with the gravity of the impending collision. Fear is a fascinating biological response. It attempts to hijack your nervous system, flooding your veins with adrenaline, screaming at you to run away from danger. As I walked further from the safety of the main house, the isolation began to press heavily against my chest. I was about to share a confined space with a man who possessed no moral boundaries. Wyatt was cornered by his own greed and capable of immense cruelty. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to break my carefully constructed composure. I stopped walking for a single moment, closing my eyes. I focused on the cold evening air filling my lungs. I visualized the terror as a tangible object, a fragile glass sphere resting in my palms. Then I crushed it. I pushed the panic down deep, replacing it with pure crystalline ice. I was not the terrified wife he expected to find trembling in the shadows. I was the warden, preparing to lock the cage. I opened my eyes, my vision sharpening as I analyzed the dark silhouette of the barn looming ahead in the twilight. I grasped the heavy iron handle of the barn door, hauling it open. The hinges groaned, a low, mournful sound that echoed into the cavernous interior. I stepped over the threshold, pulling the door shut behind me, leaving it cracked just an inch to allow his entry. I navigated through the empty stalls toward the adjoining tack room. The atmosphere inside the storage area was thick, saturated with layers of sensory memory. The sweet, earthy scent of dried alfalfa hay mingled with the sharp tang of saddle soap and aged leather. Dozens of custom bridles hung from brass hooks along the walls, casting strange, twisted shadows. Dust motes danced lazily in the thin shafts of dying light, filtering through the high, clear-story windows. I positioned myself perfectly in the center of the room. I knew exactly where the covert lenses were hidden among the rafters. I stood on a specific floorboard, ensuring my face was partially shadowed, while the area directly in front of me remained illuminated by the overhead security floodlight I had purposefully left engaged. I slid my hands deep into the pockets of my trench coat, keeping my grip firm on the thumbprint drive. The waiting transformed into an exquisite form of torture. Time seemed to stretch, bending under the immense pressure of the looming confrontation. The silence inside the tack room was profound, magnifying the sound of my own shallow breathing. Every creak of the settling timber, every rustle of the wind outside sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. I stood motionless, mastering the internal chaos, projecting the illusion of a broken, submissive woman, waiting to surrender her empire. Then the stillness shattered. It started as a low, distant hum, barely perceptible over the rustling leaves. The sound steadily amplified, growing into the distinct mechanical growl of a powerful engine navigating the rough, unpaved backroads. My jaw tightened. The low-frequency vibration traveled through the earth, ascending up through the wooden floorboards beneath my boots. Tires crunched harshly against the gravel outside the barn, stopping with a sudden jarring halt. A vehicle door slammed shut, a sharp, percussive crack tearing through the peaceful Kentucky evening. Bright halogen headlights pierced the narrow gaps in the wooden siding, casting fragmented, blinding beams across the dusty interior of the tack room. He was here. Heavy footsteps approached the barn door, moving with an arrogant, unhurried rhythm. The predator had arrived, expecting an easy slaughter. I took one final deep breath, letting the last trace of warmth leave my body. The iron handle turned, making a sharp, metallic clatter. The heavy wooden door swung open, revealing the silhouette of the man who had traded our entire life for an offshore bank account. The heavy barn door swung inward with a grating screech of rusted iron. Wyatt stepped over the threshold into the dim tack room. The man, standing before me, was a jarring departure from the polished logistics executive I had married. His normally pristine appearance had completely evaporated. He wore a rumpled dark jacket stained with dried mud along the hem. His hair, usually styled with expensive pomade, hung in disheveled strands across his forehead. Dark circles framed his bloodshot eyes, projecting the frantic, exhausted energy of a hunted animal. Yet despite his physical degradation, his posture radiated a toxic, unearned arrogance. He believed he was the smartest person in the room, holding the ultimate winning hand. I kept my expression vacant, letting my shoulders slump a fraction of an inch to sell the deception. The dramatic irony of the moment tasted sweet in the back of my throat. Wyatt stood mere feet away, mocking my vulnerability, completely oblivious to the 4 hidden high-definition lenses capturing his every movement. He did not know that a tactical federal strike team was sitting in a command van 2 miles away, watching this exact feed in pristine resolution. He was performing a monologue for a national audience, sealing his own fate with every arrogant breath. "You actually came," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The sound of his tone grated against my ears, echoing harshly off the wooden rafters. "I expected you to bring an army of lawyers, Amber. But look at you, standing here all alone, shivering in a barn. You always did fold under pressure when your precious reputation was threatened." The physical proximity to my abuser triggered a primal, biological warning system within my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to step backward into the shadows, to flee from the man who had effortlessly dismantled my life. I refused to surrender a single inch of ground. I stood rooted to the center floorboard, my hands resting deep inside the pockets of my trench coat. My fingers traced the smooth metal of the biometric thumbprint drive. I maintained my posture, projecting the exact illusion of a terrified, broken wife he had driven here to find. "I brought the drive," I replied, ensuring my voice trembled slightly. "Just like you asked. Please, Wyatt, just tell me you deleted that fake audio recording. If the FBI hears that deep fake, they will arrest me tonight." He laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that carried absolutely no warmth. "I will delete the file the second I verify the corporate transfer has cleared the proxy servers. Hand over the hardware, Amber. We are done playing games. I have a very long drive ahead of me, and I need that clean capital flowing into my new accounts by midnight." He took a step forward, extending his hand, palm facing upward. I did not move. I tightened my grip on the drive inside my pocket, deliberately stalling the transaction. I needed him to articulate his crimes with absolute clarity. The federal prosecutor required an airtight admission of guilt, unclouded by ambiguity. "I do not understand," I whispered, forcing a tear to pool in the corner of my eye. "We had a life here, Wyatt. We had a home. Why did you have to destroy everything? Why did you steal from the Thoroughbred Syndicate?" Wyatt let out a frustrated sigh, dropping his hand. He began to pace across the dusty floorboards, kicking a loose piece of hay out of his path. He moved like a caged predator, agitated by the delay, but entirely eager to boast about his own brilliance. "We did not have a life, Amber," he spat, stopping to glare at me. "You had a life. You had the sprawling estate and the ancestral bourbon cellars and the rolling green pastures. I was just the guy you married. I was the blue-collar logistics manager, moving auto parts, while your high society friends drank champagne and discussed equestrian lineages. They looked down on me. Your mother-in-law treated me like a hired hand. They all thought I was a joke. I just proved I am smarter than every single one of those arrogant breeders." "You took $4 million, I said, keeping my voice soft, guiding him toward the financial specifics. "That is not proving you are smart. That is stealing." "It is wealth redistribution," he countered, a manic gleam shining in his tired eyes. The syndicate had too much liquid cash sitting in dormant investment portfolios. I utilized my trucking firm to create a solution. The auto manufacturing supply chain is a massive, complex beast. Do you know how easy it is to hide a few $100,000 inside a falsified shipping manifest for heavy machinery? It is childishly simple. I inflated the transit costs, funneled the excess thoroughbred funds through my freight invoices, and washed the entire sum. I took a calculated breath, ensuring my next question struck the exact nerve required to extract the final piece of evidence. But you did not just wash the money, Wyatt. You routed it to the Cayman Islands. And you did not use your own name. His smirk returned, spreading wide across his unshaven face. That was the masterpiece of the entire operation. I knew the federal auditors would eventually notice the missing capital. I needed a flawless scapegoat to absorb the impact when the structure collapsed. Who better than the pristine, untouchable heiress? Forging your signature on those offshore wire transfers was the easiest task I accomplished all year. You sign your name the exact same way on every charity check and country club receipt. I spent 3 weeks practicing the loop of the capital letters until it was a flawless carbon copy. He resumed pacing, circling the perimeter of the overhead floodlight. The FBI is incredibly predictable, Amber. They follow the paper trail. I built them a beautiful highway pointing straight to your doorstep. They saw the Cayman accounts registered under your maiden name. They saw your perfect signature authorizing the movement of stolen funds. And tonight, when I secure this proxy transfer, I will liquidate the remaining domestic assets and vanish entirely. They will spend the next decade trying to prosecute you for my genius. The sheer magnitude of his narcissism was astounding. He felt an overwhelming compulsion to explain his victory, requiring an audience to validate his intellect. He operated under the profound delusion that he controlled the board, dictating the terms of my surrender. He had no conception that Agent Donovan and Assistant United States Attorney Harrison Vance were currently listening to a live feed of him detailing multiple counts of federal wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. "You framed your own wife," I whispered, projecting a final note of shattered defeat. "I did what was necessary to secure my future," he replied, stopping directly in front of me. His tone hardened, stripping away the final remnants of his manipulative charm. "Now stop stalling. Give me the biometric drive, Amber. I am not asking you again. If you refuse, I will email that deepfake audio to the federal prosecutor right now, and you will be sitting in a holding cell before sunrise." I stared into the eyes of the man I had slept beside for years, searching for a trace of humanity or regret. There was nothing. The vessel was entirely empty, occupied only by greed and a desperate need for supremacy. I had extracted every necessary confession. The trap was full. The paper trail was defeated by the undeniable reality of his own voice echoing into a federal microphone. I slowly pulled my right hand out of the trenchcoat pocket, bringing the small metal thumbprint drive into the dim halogen light. Wyatt reached out eagerly, his fingers stretching toward the device, his eyes locked on the key to his financial salvation. I held it just out of his grasp, letting the silence stretch for one more agonizing second. Before he could snatch the hardware from my palm, a sudden violent noise erupted from the darkness outside. The sound of a heavy engine roaring down the gravel path shattered the quiet evening, tearing through the fragile tension inside the tack room. Headlights swept across the wooden siding, casting wild, erratic shadows through the high windows. Someone else had arrived at the stables uninvited and driving with reckless desperation. Wyatt froze his hand, suspended in midair, his confident smirk vanishing into an expression of raw, genuine panic. The carefully controlled environment he thought he commanded was about to collapse. The roar of the approaching engine shattered the fragile quiet of the evening, causing Wyatt to freeze with his hand suspended in midair. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden, raw panic. For a fleeting second, he looked like a terrified child rather than a criminal mastermind. He glanced toward the heavy wooden door, his mind racing to calculate who could possibly be arriving at this isolated edge of the property. But before the intruder could reveal themselves, his attention snapped back to me. His desperation overrode his caution. He lunged forward, snatching the small metal thumbprint drive from my open palm. His fingers grazed my skin, sending a cold, visceral shudder down my spine. He stepped back, holding the device up to the dim halogen light, as if inspecting a rare diamond. A twisted, victorious grin spread across his unshaven face, replacing the momentary terror. He thought he had secured his financial salvation. He had no idea the drive was a useless piece of encrypted plastic provided by Valerie, acting merely as a prop to keep him talking. "You were always just collateral damage, Amber," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The polished corporate executive was gone, leaving behind a hollow, arrogant thief. I needed a pristine reputation to build my logistics empire, and your family name provided the perfect foundation. But you are too rigid, too bound by your archaic moral code. You would never have agreed to extract the real wealth from that thoroughbred syndicate. Framing you was not personal. It was a simple business calculation. You were the easiest asset to liquidate. The heavy barn door swung open with a deafening crash, the rusted iron hinges screaming in protest against the sudden force. The harsh beam of vehicle headlights sliced through the dusty air of the tack room, casting long, distorted shadows across the wooden floorboards. A silhouette stood framed in the doorway, chest heaving, breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The figure stepped over the threshold into the pale illumination of the overhead security lamp. It was Paige. The woman standing before us bore no resemblance to the glamorous suburban wife who used to sip expensive Chardonnay on my patio. Her designer clothes were ruined, covered in dried mud and stained with dark patches of sweat. Her blonde hair hung in tangled, greasy strands around her face. She wore no shoes, her bare feet coated in Kentucky clay. She looked hollowed out, frantic, bearing the unmistakable residue of a Texas holding cell and a desperate cross-country journey. Valerie and Caleb had played their final hand perfectly. While I was setting the digital trap, my attorney and Paige's husband had quietly chartered a private flight, wired the bail money, and offered her a direct path to the man who left her stranded in the dirt. She was the ultimate disruptor, a human hand grenade tossed into Wyatt's carefully controlled environment. Wyatt stared at his former accomplice, his jaw slack with shock. The metal drive slipped in his sweaty grip. He took a staggering step backward, bumping into a stack of leather saddles. "How did you get here?" he stammered, his voice cracking under the sudden immense pressure. Paige did not answer him immediately. She marched across the room, moving with a predatory, terrifying focus. She stopped, barely 2 feet away from him, her eyes burning with a furious, betrayed heat. "You left me on the side of a highway!" she shrieked, the sound echoing harshly off the wooden rafters. Her voice was raw, scraping against her vocal cords with every syllable. "You took my passport and my cash, and you drove away. I slept on a concrete bench surrounded by strangers in a border town jail because of you. I drank tepid water from a metal sink while you drove back here to secure the rest of the funds." The shock on Wyatt's face morphed into a cold, dismissive sneer. He recovered his composure, masking his initial terror with familiar cruelty. "You were skimming from the offshore accounts, Paige," he stated, his tone flat and unyielding. "Did you really think I would not notice $200,000 missing from the Cayman deposits? You tried to rob a man who was already robbing a multi-million-dollar syndicate. Leaving you in the dirt, was the most generous thing I could have done. I should have turned you over to the federal agents myself and let you take the fall for the falsified invoices. Paige unleashed a guttural scream of pure, feral rage. She launched herself forward, striking his chest with closed fists. The physical impact forced Wyatt to stumble backward into the wooden siding of the tack room. He caught her wrists, shoving her away with a harsh thrust. She stumbled, catching her balance against a heavy iron feed trough. "I helped you forge those shipping manifests," she yelled, pointing an accusatory finger at his face. "I falsified the logistics records so you could siphon the thoroughbred funds. I abandoned my children, my husband, my entire life because you promised we were going to build an empire. I earned that offshore money. You owe me my cut, Wyatt. Give me the Cayman routing numbers right now, or I swear I will walk into the federal field office and tell them exactly how you forged Amber's signature." Wyatt threw his head back and laughed. It was a chilling, soulless sound. He looked at Paige with a level of disgust that bordered on morbid fascination, exposing his total lack of empathy. "You possess zero leverage," he mocked, waving the fake thumbprint drive in the air. "I have the proxy transfer authorization. I have the clean capital. You have a petty theft charge and a ruined reputation. Who do you think the federal prosecutor is going to believe? The brilliant logistics executive? Or the desperate, hysterical mistress who drained her own kids' college funds to fund a vacation? You are nothing but a loose end, Paige. You can walk to the FBI right now and confess to whatever you want. I will be on a private jet before they even assign a case number to your pathetic statement." The two antagonists circled each other, hurling vicious insults and exposing the darkest corners of their shared conspiracy. They tore away the final shreds of their polished country club masks, revealing the greedy, pathetic reality of their true natures. They were not sophisticated corporate masterminds orchestrating a flawless heist. They were just common thieves, fighting over scraps, drowning in a toxic cocktail of arrogance and betrayal. I stood back in the shadows, maintaining total silence. I watched the spectacle unfold, absorbing the immense gravity of the moment. The woman who tried to steal my life and the man who tried to send me to prison were actively destroying each other in front of a live federal microphone. They articulated every single detail of their crimes, providing the exact audio evidence Assistant United States Attorney Harrison Vance demanded. They corroborated the forgery, the embezzlement, the offshore routing numbers, and the flight risk. They handed the Department of Justice a flawless, open and shut case wrapped in a screaming match. The psychological victory washed over me, replacing the lingering anxiety with a profound, quiet peace. I had endured the intimate betrayal, the frozen bank accounts, the social execution, and the federal threats. I had walked into this dark barn armed only with my intellect and a hidden wire. I had extracted every ounce of truth required to clear my family name and reclaim my empire. The people who thought they could use my quiet demeanor as a weapon against me were currently shouting their own prison sentences into the rafters. Wyatt turned his attention back to me, his eyes flashing with desperate urgency. He gripped the metal drive, ready to run for his vehicle. He wanted to escape the screaming woman and execute the digital transfer before his window closed. "This is over, Amber," he declared, a false bravado coating his trembling voice. "I am leaving. Do not try to follow me, and keep her away from my truck." I stepped forward out of the shadows, moving into the stark, pale beam of the overhead security floodlight. The heavy fabric of my trench coat swished softly against my boots. I did not look at my husband. I did not spare a single glance for my former best friend. I lifted my chin and directed my gaze straight up toward the highest wooden rafter, pinpointing the exact location of the covert, high-definition camera lens hidden in the timber. I stared into the digital eye of the federal government, maintaining eye contact for one deliberate, unblinking second. Then I shifted my focus back to Wyatt. I looked at the man who had traded our marriage for a prison sentence he did not yet realize he was serving. I let a slow, icy smile curve the corners of my lips. I savored the final taste of the deception, knowing the strike team was already moving through the tall grass outside the barn doors. Good luck. The two syllables hung in the damp air of the tack room. Wyatt paused, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the strange finality in my tone. He looked at the fake thumbprint drive resting in his palm, then back at my stoic expression. He did not have time to unravel the puzzle. The world outside the barn ignited. Searing white beams from tactical floodlights erupted through the high, clear-story windows. The sudden illumination was blinding, washing out the dusty shadows and casting sharp, jagged silhouettes across the wooden floorboards. The quiet Kentucky evening fractured under the sudden roar of heavy engines. Multiple vehicles surrounded the structure, their tires churning the wet gravel into a chaotic frenzy. Federal agents do not knock when the trap is sprung. Heavy boots kicked the rusted side doors, forcing the weathered wood to splinter and give way. Men and women clad in dark tactical gear poured into the confined space, holding their weapons in a low, ready position. The sheer kinetic force of their entry displaced the stale air, sending clouds of hay dust swirling into the blinding light. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," an authoritative voice bellowed, echoing off the rafters. "Keep your hands visible and get on the ground." Page shattered instantly. The former country club socialite who had coveted my wealth and falsified corporate shipping manifests dissolved into a puddle of raw panic. She unleashed a high-pitched wail of pure terror, dropping to her knees on the rough planks. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically as an investigator approached her with clinical efficiency. Cold steel handcuffs clicked shut, securing her wrists behind her back. The metallic snap sounded like a gavel falling, ending her desperate attempt to steal a life she had not earned. Wyatt chose a different path. The polished logistics executive vanished, replaced by a cornered animal consumed by a primal urge to flee. He dropped the useless plastic drive, letting it clatter forgotten against the floor. He spun away from the breaching team, locking his sights on the rear service exit. He sprinted toward the narrow door, his expensive leather shoes slipping against the loose hay. He crashed through the frame, bursting out into the cool night air. I followed at a measured, deliberate pace, stopping at the threshold to watch the final sequence unfold. The recent storm had saturated the rolling pastures, transforming the perimeter of the stables into a slick, unforgiving mire. Wyatt pumped his arms, running with frantic desperation toward the dense tree line. He believed the darkness of the Appalachian foothills could hide him. He failed to realize the perimeter was already sealed. His foot hit a patch of saturated clay. He lost his traction, his legs scrambling uselessly for purchase. Before he could regain his balance, 3 federal investigators emerged from the shadows, closing the distance with terrifying speed. They hit him hard, driving his shoulder into the wet earth. Wyatt went down, face first, into the thick Kentucky mud. He struggled, thrashing against the weight of his captors, but the fight was brief. They pinned his arms, securing his wrists in iron cuffs. His tailored jacket, the same one he wore to orchestrate his $4 million embezzlement scheme, was now soaked in dark, freezing sludge. I stood perfectly still in the doorway, the heavy gabardine of my trench coat shielding me from the evening chill. The chaos unfolded mere yards away, yet I remained entirely untouched, a silent observer, watching the consequences of betrayal manifest in real time. Agent Donovan stepped into the illumination of the floodlights, his dark raincoat shedding water from the earlier downpour. He walked over to the tangled group on the ground and hauled my husband up by his collar. Wyatt was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps, spitting dirt from his mouth. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his face streaked with mud and raw terror. He looked around wildly, searching for an angle, a loophole, a sliver of leverage he could manipulate. Donovan did not read him his rights immediately. Instead, the seasoned investigator pulled a specialized tactical tablet from his vest pocket. He tapped the glowing screen. The crisp, uncompressed audio of my husband's voice echoed across the dark pasture. The hidden surveillance matrix had captured every boast, every threat, and every damning detail with pristine clarity. "You were always just collateral damage," the recorded voice sneered, projecting outward into the night air. "Framing you was not personal. It was a simple business calculation. You were the easiest asset to liquidate." The playback continued, detailing the falsified invoices, the Cayman routing numbers, and the synthetic deep-fake extortion. The audio was an undeniable, irrefutable death sentence for his freedom. I watched the realization strike Wyatt like a physical blow. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving a pallid, ghostly hue beneath the dirt. His frantic eyes darted toward the barn, looking up at the high wooden eaves. He finally understood the purpose of the security system he had mocked for years. He recognized that I had not surrendered my empire. I had used his own arrogance to build his cage. He opened his mouth. His jaw worked frantically, trying to formulate a persuasive defense, trying to deploy the charisma that had fueled his entire career. But the slick salesman was dead. The evidence was insurmountable. No words came out. He simply stared at me, his silence a profound admission of total defeat. Donovan turned him around, marching the defeated architect toward the idling fleet of government vehicles. Another team escorted Paige out of the barn, her bare feet dragging across the gravel, her hollow sobs cutting through the crisp air. They were loaded into separate dark cruisers. The heavy reinforced doors slammed shut, severing them from the world they had tried to steal. The flashing red and blue emergency lights painted the rolling green pastures in surreal rhythmic pulses. The intense activity began to subside, settling into a quiet, organized departure. Footsteps crunched on the gravel beside me. Valerie emerged from the shadows, walking with her usual purposeful stride, despite the uneven terrain. The formidable corporate attorney held 2 insulated paper cups, carrying the rich aroma of dark roast coffee. She extended her hand, offering one to me. I wrapped my fingers around the warm cardboard, letting the heat seep into my chilled skin. I took a slow sip, savoring the bitter, grounding taste. Flawless execution. Valerie noted her tone, carrying a rare note of genuine respect. The federal prosecutor already confirmed the audio file satisfies every condition of your immunity agreement. The freeze on your domestic accounts will be lifted by morning. We stood side by side on the edge of the property, watching the engines of the federal fleet shift into gear. The caravan of dark vehicles began a slow, steady roll down the long, winding driveway. They carried away the wreckage of my former life, removing the toxic elements that had festered in the shadows of my home. The flashing lights grew smaller, retreating down the county highway until they eventually disappeared beyond the heavy iron gates. The bluegrass estate plunged back into a peaceful, serene darkness. The crickets resumed their nightly chorus, undisturbed by the monumental shift in power that had just transpired. The battle was over. The paper trail was sealed. I took another sip of my coffee, breathing in the clean, unfiltered air of a reclaimed empire. 6 months evaporate swiftly when you are occupied with the rigorous task of rebuilding a stolen empire. The suffocating humidity of the summer eventually surrendered to the crisp, sharp bite of a Kentucky autumn, bringing a necessary chill that clarified the senses. The federal justice system moves with a glacial, rigid pace, but its final destination remains undeniable. I sat in the polished gallery of the district courthouse, wearing a structured navy blazer, watching the final gavel fall. The heavy wooden crack echoed through the cavernous room, sealing the fate of the man who thought he could outsmart the world. Wyatt received a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. When the judge read the mandate, my former husband did not glance back at the gallery. His shoulders slumped, devoid of the bespoke suits and the haughty posture that defined his prior existence. He was reduced to a sterile inmate number, destined to spend the next decade and a half inside a concrete box far away from the rolling green pastures he tried to conquer. Paige faced a slightly different execution. The prosecutors offered her a plea arrangement in exchange for her full cooperation, securing a 5-year term in a minimum security facility. The judicial punishment, however, paled in comparison to the social excommunication she endured. The tight-knit bluegrass community proved incredibly unforgiving toward those who betray their own. Her name was quietly but permanently erased from the country club registers, the charity boards, and the neighborhood text threads. She became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered over afternoon tea and discarded into obscurity. My own path diverged entirely from the wreckage they left behind. The conditional immunity agreement held firm, protecting my legacy from the fallout. With Valerie navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth, I legally absorbed the legitimate domestic remains of Wyatt Logistics. We did not attempt to salvage the trucking firm. Instead, we performed a clinical corporate autopsy. We liquidated the warehouses, sold off the fleets of commercial transport vehicles, and drained the remaining proxy accounts. The paperwork was endless, a mountain of deeds and transfer forms that I signed with steady, unwavering hands. I channeled every single dollar of that reclaimed capital directly back into the soil of my ancestors. I expanded the thoroughbred breeding operation, purchasing adjacent acreage and acquiring a dozen premium yearlings boasting championship lineages. I turned his fraudulent ambition into the foundation of my legitimate legacy, transforming dirty logistics money into magnificent, powerful animals. Now the estate pulses with a renewed, vibrant energy. I stepped out onto the wraparound porch, pulling a thick cashmere sweater tightly around my shoulders to ward off the late October breeze. The air carried the distinct earthy fragrance of fallen oak leaves, crushed dry grass, and the faint, sweet scent of grain from the stables. The sky stretched above in a brilliant, cloudless azure, forming a perfect canvas for the fading afternoon light. Down in the valley, my newly acquired horses grazed peacefully, their sleek, muscular coats catching the sun as they moved in a quiet, synchronized rhythm. The rhythmic thud of their hooves striking the earth served as a living, breathing testament to my survival. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway broke the tranquil silence. I did not tense or anticipate a federal raid. I simply watched a familiar silver truck navigate the winding path, pulling to a gentle stop near the front steps. Caleb stepped out of the driver's side, leaving the engine idling. He looked remarkably different from the broken, frantic man who had pounded on my door 6 months ago. The heavy, dark circles under his eyes had faded, and his posture radiated a calm, steady strength. The passenger doors opened, and his 2 young children tumbled out holding crisp red apples. They ran across the manicured lawn, their bright laughter echoing across the vast property as they rushed toward the wooden fence bordering the main pasture. Caleb walked up the wooden steps, resting his hands on the white railing. He watched his kids offer the fruit to a gentle bay mare who nudged their palms with a velvet nose. "They are doing well," he said, a soft, genuine smile touching his face. The new routine took a while to establish, but children are resilient. They bounce back faster than we do. I stood beside him, leaning against the sturdy pillar. We all heal at our own pace, Caleb. You secured their future. That is the only thing that truly matters. He turned his head, meeting my gaze with profound, quiet gratitude. He had managed to rebuild his veterinary practice, securing a small business loan to stabilize the clinic after Page drained their accounts. We did not discuss the inmates or the federal trial. We chose to occupy the present, leaving the toxic ghosts buried in the past where they belonged. He tipped an imaginary hat, murmuring a soft word of thanks, before turning back to wrangle his children into the truck. I waved as they drove away, the taillights disappearing beyond the iron gates, leaving me alone in the serene twilight. I walked back into the foyer, moving straight toward the study. I bypassed the sleek modern desk and opened a small vintage cabinet resting in the corner. Inside sat a crystal decanter filled with a reserve batch from the ancestral bourbon cellar. I poured a modest measure into a heavy glass tumbler. I carried the drink back outside, taking a seat in the woven wicker chair facing the western horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in vivid strokes of burnt orange and deep magenta. I raised the glass, letting the golden liquid catch the fiery light before taking a slow, deliberate sip. The complex flavors bloomed across my palate, carrying notes of toasted oak, rich vanilla, and the undeniable taste of victory. Many people believe revenge requires a spectacular, loud destruction. They assume justice demands screaming matches, broken glass, and public hysteria. But surviving a profound, intimate betrayal teaches you a much deeper truth. The ultimate retaliation is not found in ruining the person who tried to break you. It is found in realizing they no longer hold the power to dictate your emotions. The fear that once paralyzed me had burned away, leaving behind a hardened, pristine core. Wyatt thought my quiet nature was a weakness, a vulnerability he could effortlessly exploit. He failed to understand that silence is a predator's greatest asset. I did not need to shout to reclaim my empire. I simply let the undeniable weight of the truth perform the execution for me. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool, clean air of the Kentucky bluegrass. My name was clear. My land was secure. The invisible chains of manipulation were permanently severed. I opened my eyes and watched the first evening stars pierce the darkening sky, feeling a profound, untouchable peace. I was entirely free. When we consider the legacy we leave for our children, our minds instinctively drift toward the tangible. We visualize the college funds meticulously tucked away in high-yield savings accounts, the sprawling family homes surrounded by manicured lawns, and the heirloom jewelry passed down through generations. In the relentless pursuit of the American dream, we have culturally conflated provision with protection. We assume that if the roof is sturdy and the bank accounts are full, the children inside the walls are safe. But the quiet, devastating narrative of Amber Dunn, her fugitive husband Wyatt, and the treacherous betrayal of a best friend reveals a terrifying and undeniable reality. The most critical inheritance we pass down to the next generation is completely invisible. It is the architecture of our integrity. In modern American culture, we are constantly bombarded with ideals that equate successful parenting and family responsibility with material accumulation and the preservation of appearances. We praise the fathers who work 80-hour weeks to fund suburban estates, and we admire the mothers who orchestrate flawless charity galas while managing pristine households. We calculate our worth as parents by the neighborhoods we can afford, the private tuitions we pay, and the curated smiling holiday cards we mail out every December to our country club peers. But what happens when that sprawling, nutrient-rich pasture is purchased with stolen money? What happens when the sparkling diamond bracelet was bought solely to distract from a clandestine affair? The illusion of protection shatters violently. Consider the profound devastation of Caleb, a good, hard-working veterinarian who discovered his children's future had been drained by a partner funding an escape. His tragedy is a literal manifestation of emotional bankruptcy. Wyatt and Paige used the scorecard of the American dream to justify their immense greed. They confused wealth with worth and security with secrecy. Their story forces us to realize that financial provision means absolutely nothing if it is built on a foundation of deceit. True family responsibility requires far more than balancing a checkbook. It demands the moral courage to live in the light, even when the truth is ugly. To raise a child with deep emotional awareness within a traditional family structure, we must first demand radical emotional honesty from ourselves. Children are not passive observers in our homes. They are active, hyper-vigilant emotional sponges. They absorb the unspoken tensions, the lingering silences at the dinner table, and the forced, brittle quality of a parent's laughter, long before they possess the vocabulary to articulate what is wrong. If a parent endures public humiliation and private gaslighting just to keep a family intact, they are not shielding their children from pain. They are inadvertently writing a manual on how to tolerate abuse. They are teaching their sons that manipulation is a tool, and their daughters that silence is a duty. Fairness in parenting is so frequently misunderstood in our society. We often believe that being fair means shielding our kids from the terrifying realities of adult failure. We hide the arguments, we cover up the betrayals, and we desperately try to present them with a flawless world. But true fairness is refusing to feed a child a lie. It is having the courage to show them what self-respect looks like in real time. When Amber methodically gathered evidence, hired ruthless legal counsel, and calmly locked the doors on a toxic marriage, she was executing the ultimate act of long-term guidance, even to the children looking on from the periphery, like Caleb's kids. She demonstrated that love and loyalty should never require the surrender of one's dignity. By refusing to accept betrayal as the cost of admission to her life, she modeled an impenetrable emotional boundary. We teach our children how to be treated, not by the advice we give them, but by the behavior we accept from others. Amber showed that a traditional family structure is only as valuable as the truth it is built upon. This is the essence of emotional awareness. It is the strength to sit in the ruins of the life you planned, look at the people you love, and name the pain without letting it consume you. When Caleb brought his children to Amber's estate months after the dust had settled, we didn't see a family destroyed. We saw a family redefined by truth. We saw children learning that adults make catastrophic, devastating mistakes, but that accountability remains absolutely non-negotiable. They learned that you can lose your savings, your mother, and your sense of normalcy, yet still find peace on a crisp autumn afternoon, feeding apples to a gentle mare. If you have ever navigated the dark, turbulent waters of betrayal, or if you simply appreciate the profound, quiet resilience of the human spirit in the face of deception, I encourage you to subscribe and follow Melissa Told Stories. We are building a community dedicated to uncovering the brutal, beautiful truths of our lives, one narrative at a time. Your stories, your reflections, and your strength are what make this space so vital, reminding us all that we are never truly alone in the dark, and that our greatest trials often become our most powerful testimonies. As we reflect on the lengths to which people will go to deceive and the incredible quiet strength required to overcome it, we are left with a lingering realization about the true nature of parenting and responsibility. We are conditioned from birth to believe that the ultimate goal of family life is to shield our children from our pain, to offer them unbroken homes, unblemished heroes, and an unshakable sense of security. We spend our entire lives trying to build impenetrable fortresses around them, terrified that if a single crack appears in the foundation, we have failed as protectors. But conventional wisdom has lied to us. We are told that a broken home is the greatest tragedy a child can endure. We are instructed to compromise to swallow our pride and to keep the family together for the sake of the children. But a home built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and silent suffering is not a home at all. It is a beautifully decorated prison. Perhaps the greatest, most enduring gift you can give your child is not an unbroken home, but the undeniable lived proof that a home can be shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, and the people inside it can still survive. We obsess over protecting our children from heartbreak, forgetting that heartbreak is the very mechanism that expands the capacity of the human soul. Do not strive to show your children a flawless, painless life. Show them how to beautifully, unapologetically survive a broken one. Because the truth is the most dangerous thing you can teach a child is that a family is a safe place to hide. The only truly safe place they will ever have is the unshakable foundation of their own self-respect. And sometimes, the highest, most profound act of family preservation is having the courage to burn it all down.